The moment Daniel Cole slammed the folder onto the boardroom table, 40 executives stopped breathing. "Everything you buried," he said, his voice low and steady, "is right here." His hands were shaking not from fear, but from 3 years of being called a thief for a crime he never committed. Across town, his 8-year-old daughter was seconds away from opening the front door to strangers. And the one woman who could save him, his boss, the one who once blushed at a joke he barely remembered making, was about to risk everything she'd built to stand beside a broken single dad the whole company had already condemned. Before we begin, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a good man deserves one more chance, subscribe and stay with me until the very last line. Daniel Cole had learned a long time ago that the worst moments in a man's life rarely announce themselves. They slip in quietly disguised as ordinary days. The day everything began was one of those. It was 6:47 in the evening, and the offices of Hartwell Group were nearly empty. The cleaning crew hadn't arrived yet. Most of the executives had gone home to their wives, their dinners, their comfortable lives. Daniel was still at his desk on the 14th floor, the only light left burning in a row of dark cubicles because Daniel Cole was always the last man to leave. He wasn't ambitious. That wasn't why he stayed. He stayed because home was a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the rent went up every year and the paycheck never quite caught up. And because the overtime meant an extra $60, and $60 meant his daughter could have the winter coat she'd been quietly not asking for. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who watched Emma after school. "She's fed. Doing homework. Asked when Daddy's coming home. I told her soon." Was that a lie? Daniel smiled at the screen, then let the smile fade. "Not a lie," he typed back. 30 minutes. "Thank you, Rosa. I owe you. You owe me nothing. You're a good father. Go home to your girl." He set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. He was 39 years old, and he felt 60. Somewhere in the last few years, after the divorce, after the custody fight, after the endless nights of doing math on the back of grocery receipts, he'd stopped seeing his own reflection as a man and started seeing it as a machine. Wake up. Make lunch. Drop Emma at school. Work. Pick her up. Dinner. Homework. Bedtime story. Repeat. Repeat. Repeat until the years blurred together and you couldn't remember the last time you'd laughed for no reason at all. That's when he heard the heels. Sharp. Deliberate. Coming down the corridor at a pace that told you someone was thinking hard and walking harder. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. There was only one person in the entire building who wore that particular sound like armor. Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer of Hartwell Group, the woman whose name was on the door of the corner office, whose signature moved millions, whose face had been on the cover of 3 business magazines, and whose reputation was carved from ice so clean and cold that half the men in the building were afraid to make eye contact with her in the elevator. She stopped at the end of his row. "Cole." Daniel stood up out of reflex, the way you stand when a superior officer enters a room. "Ms. Hale, I didn't realize anyone else was still here." "I could say the same." She studied him for a moment, arms crossed, a stack of files pressed against her chest. "Do you ever go home? Eventually?" "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. She wasn't a woman who gave smiles away cheaply. "The overnight logistics report, the one I asked accounting for on Tuesday. Nobody sent it." "That's because it isn't finished." "It was due Wednesday." "It was due Wednesday if you wanted it wrong," Daniel said, and immediately wondered if he'd just ended his career. He wasn't the type to talk back to a CEO, but he was tired, and tiredness makes honest men bold. "The numbers coming out of the Western distribution accounts don't reconcile, Ms. Hale. I've run them 4 times. Somebody's been moving money between the shipping subsidiaries and the invoices don't match the manifests. If I hand you a report that just says everything's fine, I'd be lying to you. And I don't lie to the people I work for." For a long moment, Victoria Hale said nothing. Then she pulled out the chair from the empty cubicle across from his, sat down, and set her files on the desk. "Show me," she said. Daniel blinked. It's a lot of numbers. I've been reading a lot of numbers since before you were shaving Cole. Show me. And so he did. He turned his monitor toward her and walked her through it. The discrepancies. The invoices that didn't line up. The vendor accounts that received payments for shipments that, as far as he could tell, had never physically existed. He'd been quietly circling these numbers for 2 weeks, not because anyone asked him to, but because they'd bothered him the way a splinter bothers you, a small persistent wrongness you can't leave alone. Victoria leaned closer to the screen. She didn't interrupt. She didn't nod along politely the way executives do when they've stopped listening. She read. And the longer she read, the stiller she got. "Who else has seen this?" she finally asked. "No one." "You're certain?" "I flagged it to Mr. Grayson last week. He told me I was reading it wrong and to stay in my lane." Something changed in her face at the name. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, but Daniel caught it. He was good at reading faces. When you've spent years watching a judge decide whether you're a fit father, you learn to read the smallest muscle in a person's expression. "Richard Grayson told you that," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And you kept digging anyway." "I couldn't help it. When something's wrong, I can't just—" He stopped, embarrassed. "It's a bad habit. My ex-wife used to say I don't know how to leave things alone." "Your ex-wife," Victoria said, "sounds like she never met a problem worth solving." She straightened up. "Send me everything, encrypted, tonight, not through the company server. Do you have a personal email?" Yes. "Use it." She stood gathering her files. "And Cole. Don't tell anyone we had this conversation. Not Grayson, not anyone in accounting, not a soul. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." She paused at the edge of the cubicle, and for the first time since she'd walked up, something in her posture softened just a fraction. "How long have you worked here?" 6 years. 6 years, she repeated, like the number surprised her. "And this is the first real conversation we've ever had. You're a busy woman." "That's not an excuse. It's a symptom." She shook her head slightly as if arguing with herself. "Go home, Daniel. Your daughter's waiting." He froze. "How do you know I have a daughter?" Victoria was already walking away, heels clicking back down the corridor. But she called over her shoulder, "There's a drawing taped to the side of your monitor. A little girl drew a house with 3 people in it and crossed one of them out. I noticed things too." And then she was gone, and Daniel Cole sat back down in the dark and looked at the drawing his daughter had made. The one he'd forgotten was even there, and felt something twist behind his ribs that he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Emma. She was 8 years old, and she was the reason Daniel Cole got out of bed in the morning. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's soft heart, which Daniel privately thought was the worst possible combination for surviving the world, and the best possible combination for making it better. She collected facts about whales. She hated peas, but ate them anyway because peas make you strong, and I want to be strong like you, Daddy. She still slept with a nightlight, and she still asked every few weeks in the small voice children use, when they already know the answer will hurt, why Mommy didn't live with them. Daniel never had a good answer for that one. The truth was ugly and complicated, and no fit thing to hand a child. The truth was that Sarah, his ex-wife, had walked out 4 years ago, right around the time Hartwell Group promoted a younger, richer, smoother man named Trevor into her orbit, and that she'd spent the years since building a new life with Trevor's money and Trevor's connections, and that the only piece of the old life she seemed to want back was Emma. Not out of love. Daniel had stopped believing that. Out of something colder. Out of the fact that a mother who abandons her child looks bad at cocktail parties, and a mother who wins her daughter back from a struggling single father looks like a hero. He got home that night at 7:31. Emma launched off the couch the second the door opened. "Daddy!" She hit him at knee height like a small missile, arms around his legs, and Daniel scooped her up, even though his back protested, even though she was getting too big for it, because he knew the way parents secretly always know that there were only so many of these left. "Hey, whale girl, Did you eat your peas? All of them. Mrs. Alvarez saw? Emma pulled back to look at him with the deadly seriousness of a small child reporting to a superior. Daddy, did you know a blue whale's heart is so big a person could swim through the arteries? I did not know that. Now you do. You're welcome. She squeezed his neck. You smell like the office. I always smell like the office. I like it. It smells like you're taking care of us. And there it was, the thing that undid him every single time. Daniel held his daughter a little tighter and said nothing, because if he'd tried to talk in that moment, his voice would have cracked, and he had a rule about not crying in front of Emma. He'd broken it exactly twice. Both times she'd patted his face with her small hand and said, It's okay, Daddy. We're a team. Later, after the bath and the story and the third glass of water she always requested to delay bedtime, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and did what Victoria Hale had asked. He gathered every file, every spreadsheet, every screenshot of the discrepancies he'd found, and he sent them to her personal email from his own. It was almost midnight when a reply came back. 2 words. Good work. He stared at those 2 words for a long time. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had said them to him. Not his ex-wife, not Grayson, not the endless parade of managers who'd taken his overtime and given him nothing but a form letter at Christmas. Good work. He closed the laptop and went to bed. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Cole fell asleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, someone had finally seen him. He had no idea that on the other side of the city, in a glass office 30 floors above the street, a man named Richard Grayson was staring at a security alert on his own screen. An alert that told him a certain accountant on the 14th floor had been accessing files he had no business touching. And Richard Grayson was not a man who left things alone either. The change came slowly at first. That's how these things always come. For the next 3 weeks, Victoria Hale started calling Daniel into meetings he had no business being in. Small ones. Quiet ones. Twice, she called him up to the executive floor, a place Daniel had visited exactly once in 6 years, and closed the door and asked him to walk her through another set of numbers. The people in accounting noticed. What's going on with you and the Ice Queen? His cubicle neighbor Marcus asked one afternoon, leaning over the divider. You getting promoted or fired because those are the only 2 reasons Victoria Hale learns your name. Neither, Daniel said. It's just a project. A project? Marcus grinned. Right, sure. Well, if you get promoted, remember the little people. And if you get fired. He lowered his voice, glancing toward Grayson's office at the end of the floor. Watch your back, man. I'm serious. Grayson's been asking about you. Came by yesterday when you were at lunch. Wanted to know what you've been working on. Daniel felt something cold slide down his spine. What did you tell him? That I mind my own business, which is more than I can say for you lately. Marcus's grin faded into something more honest, more worried. Look, Daniel, I've been here 11 years. I've watched a lot of guys get curious about things they shouldn't be curious about. They don't work here anymore. You've got a kid. Don't be a hero. Heroes don't have dental insurance. It was good advice. Daniel didn't take it, because that same afternoon Victoria called him into her office and shut the door and said without preamble, The discrepancies you found go back 6 years. Daniel sat down slowly. 6 years, at least. I had my personal accountant, someone outside the company, someone I trust, go through everything you sent me. And then some. She stood at the window with her back to him, arms crossed, the city spread out below her like something she owned. $14 million, Daniel. $14 million has moved through phantom vendor accounts and out the door of this company over the last 6 years. Money that was supposed to pay for shipments that never existed. And every single transaction was authorized by the same office. Grayson, Daniel said. She turned around. Richard Grayson has been chief financial officer of this company for 8 years. He's on the board. Half the members owe him favors. He golfs with our biggest investors. He was here before I was made CEO, and there are people on that board who wanted him to have my job instead. So why are you telling me this? Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel, who was so good at reading faces, realized that for the first time he couldn't read hers at all. There was too much behind it. "Because I need someone I can trust," she said finally. "And you're the only person in this building who told me the truth when a lie would have been easier. You barely know me. I know enough." She came around the desk and leaned against the front of it, close enough that Daniel could see she was more tired than she ever let the world see. "You stayed late every night for 6 years and never once put in for a promotion. You flagged a $14 million fraud to your boss, got told to shut up and kept going anyway, not because there was anything in it for you, but because it was wrong and you couldn't stand it being wrong. Men like that are rarer than you think, Daniel. I've spent 20 years in rooms full of the other kind." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he said the truth, which was becoming a habit with her. "I'm scared, Ms. Hale." "Good," she said softly. "So am I. It means we're both paying attention." And that small, honest admission from a woman who never admitted anything was the moment Daniel Cole realized he was in far deeper than a spreadsheet. Something was starting between them. Neither of them would have called it that. Both of them would have denied it. But it was there in the room, quiet and undeniable. Den. The joke happened on a Thursday. They'd been working late, the two of them alone in her office, the way it had become normal to do, going through a decade of financial records printed out and spread across her conference table because neither of them trusted the digital versions anymore. It was almost 10 at night. Emma was at a sleepover, the first one Daniel had ever let her go to, and he'd spent the whole evening secretly terrified something would go wrong, and it hadn't, and the relief had made him loose and easy in a way he almost never allowed himself to be. Victoria had kicked off her heels an hour ago. Her hair, always perfect, had come loose. She'd rolled up her sleeves and there was a smudge of highlighter on her forearm, and she was laughing. Actually laughing at something Daniel had said about the absurdity of a vendor invoice for consulting services, totaling exactly $99,999, $1, under the amount that would have triggered a mandatory board review. "He was that careful about everything," Victoria said, wiping her eyes. $14 million, $1 at a time under the line. You almost have to admire it." "You don't have to admire it." "No," she agreed. "You don't." She looked at the mountain of paper between them, then at the clock, then at Daniel. "It's 10 o'clock. We've been at this for 4 hours. When did you last eat?" "Lunch. Maybe. I had half a granola bar." "Daniel, I know. I'm bad at the eating thing. Single dad. You feed the kid first, and then you forget you're also a person who needs food." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how comfortable he'd gotten, how easy it was to just talk to her. "It's been a long time since I sat in a room with an adult who wasn't a teacher or a lawyer. This is nice, even if we're technically uncovering a massive crime." "Romantic," Victoria said dryly. And Daniel loosed tired, happy in a way he hadn't been in years. His guard all the way down for the first time since the divorce, grinned and said the words that would change everything. "So, any chance I can just stay here tonight?" He meant it as a joke. He meant I'm too tired to drive home to an empty apartment. He meant this room with you in it feels more like home than home has felt in a long time. He meant nothing by it, and he meant everything by it. And the second the words left his mouth, he wanted to grab them back out of the air because he saw what happened to Victoria Hale's face. She blushed. She, Victoria Hale, CEO Ice Queen. The woman who negotiated with billionaires without blinking. The woman half the building was afraid of. Turned a deep and helpless shade of red right up to her ears and looked down at the table and couldn't meet his eyes. "That's," she started. "That's not, I don't think that would be." "I'm sorry," Daniel said quickly, mortified. "That was a stupid joke. I didn't mean I'm sorry, I'm just tired. I'll go. I should go." "No, it's fine. It's a funny joke." She said it too fast. She still wouldn't look at him. She was gathering papers that didn't need gathering, straightening a stack that was already straight. "You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Lots of numbers. Right, numbers. He stood, grabbed his jacket and fled, and the whole drive home he kicked himself for it. Replayed it 100 times, that ridiculous joke, and the way she'd colored like a schoolgirl, and he told himself it meant nothing, that she was just embarrassed for him, that he'd made an idiot of himself in front of the most powerful person he'd ever met. He was wrong. He was completely, entirely wrong about what that blush meant, and it would take him months and a collapsing empire and the near loss of everything he loved before he understood it. Because Victoria Hale hadn't blushed because the joke was awkward. She'd blushed because for 1/2 of 1 second, some tired and buried part of her had actually wanted to say yes. Everything changed the following Monday. Daniel arrived at 7:15 the way he always did. Coffee in one hand, Emma's forgotten juice box lodged in his jacket pocket where he'd stuffed it that morning. He badged in, walked to his desk. His badge didn't open the accounting floor. He tried it again. Nothing. Red light. He frowned, tried a third time, and that's when the security guard, a man named Phil, that Daniel had said good morning to 500 times over 6 years, walked over with an expression Daniel had never seen on his face. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to need you to come with me." "Phil, my badge is just glitching, it does this sometimes." "Mr. Cole?" Phil lowered his voice. There was real regret in it. "I'm sorry, I got orders. You're supposed to be escorted to HR, effective this morning." Daniel's stomach dropped through the floor. "Escorted for what?" "I don't know the details. Phil glanced over his shoulder. "Look, whatever this is, keep your head. Don't make it worse, okay?" The walk to HR was the longest walk of Daniel's life. Every cubicle he passed, people looked up and then looked away, the way people do at a funeral, the way people do when they're grateful it's not them. He caught Marcus's eye across the floor. Marcus mouthed a single word. "Grayson." The HR director was waiting in a conference room. So was a company lawyer. So sitting at the head of the table with his hands folded and a look of deep theatrical sadness on his face was Richard Grayson himself. Daniel D. Grayson said, warm as a funeral director, "Please, sit down. This is difficult for all of us." "What's going on?" "I think you know." Grayson slid a folder across the table. "This morning, our internal security team flagged a serious breach. Someone has been accessing confidential financial records without authorization, downloading them, removing them from company systems, sending sensitive company data to external personal email accounts." He let the words hang. "That's theft of proprietary information, Daniel. Potentially criminal. And every access log points to your credentials." Daniel felt the trap close around him with a horrible, precise clarity. Because it was true. He had accessed those files. He had sent them to a personal email. Victoria's personal email. He'd done it because she'd asked him to, but there was no record of that was there. She'd told him to keep it secret. No emails. No paper trail. Nothing that tied her to a single thing he'd done. He'd done it all himself in his own name and left the perfect fingerprints all over the crime. "That's not," Daniel started. "I can explain that. You were what?" Grayson's voice was gentle, and that was the worst part. "Investigating on whose authority did anyone in this company authorize you to remove financial records from our servers?" "Victoria did," Daniel thought. "Victoria authorized all of it." He opened his mouth to say her name. And then he stopped. Because in that half-second, Daniel Cole understood exactly what would happen if he said it. He'd be one accountant's word against the entire executive floor. There was no evidence tying Victoria to any of it, she'd made sure of that, and now he understood why, and the understanding felt like ice water. Either she'd set him up as a fall guy from the beginning, or she'd been protecting the investigation so carefully that she'd accidentally left him standing alone in the open when the shooting started. He didn't know which. He didn't know her well enough to know which. And if he named her now, if he dragged the one person who believed him into Grayson's line of fire before either of them was ready, he might not be saving himself. He might be destroying the only person who could actually take Grayson down. So Daniel Cole did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He kept her name behind his teeth. "I want to talk to a lawyer," he said quietly. Grayson smiled. It was a small, satisfied smile, the smile of a man watching a plan unfold exactly the way he'd designed it. Of course, that's your right. In the meantime, effective immediately, you're suspended without pay, pending investigation. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. He stood buttoning his jacket. I truly am sorry, Daniel. You were a good worker, but we simply can't have people who think the rules don't apply to them. He walked out. The lawyer walked out. The HR director slid a box across the table they'd already packed Daniel's desk. That's how ready they'd been. That's how long this had been coming, and left him alone in the conference room with a cardboard box containing 6 years of his life and his daughter's crossed-out drawing of a house. Daniel sat there for a long moment, and then he did something he hadn't done in front of anyone in years. He put his face in his hands, not for himself. He could survive being poor. He'd been poor before. He put his face in his hands because of a single terrible thought that had bloomed the instant Grayson said the word criminal. The custody hearing. It was in 6 weeks. Sarah's lawyer had already argued that Daniel was an unstable provider, that a single father working 60-hour weeks couldn't give a child stability. Daniel had beaten it back every time with one simple fact: I have a steady job. A good job. 6 years at the same company. He didn't have that anymore, and when Sarah's lawyer found out, and they would find out, they always found out, that Daniel Cole had not only lost his job, but had lost it under investigation for criminal fraud, they wouldn't have to argue anything. He would lose Emma. He would lose the only thing in the world that mattered. He didn't remember driving home. He remembered pieces of it. A red light he sat through twice, a horn behind him, his own hands white on the wheel. He remembered standing in the parking lot of his apartment building for 20 minutes, because he couldn't make himself go upstairs and look at his daughter's face, knowing what he now knew. His phone rang 4 times on the drive, all from a number he didn't recognize. He didn't answer. It rang again as he sat in the parking lot. This time he looked at it. Same unknown number. He answered it because he was too numb to decide not to. Hello? Daniel. Victoria Hale's voice. Low, urgent, nothing like the boardroom. Where are you? Are you all right? Something hot and ugly rose in his chest. Am I all right? That's a hell of a question, Ms. Hale. Daniel. They walked me out this morning. Did you know that's suspended? Under investigation. For fraud. For the exact files you asked me to send. To your personal email. Which funny thing doesn't seem to exist anywhere in the record. It's just me. My name. My credentials. My crime. His voice cracked, and he hated it. So no. No, Victoria. I am not all right. I've got a custody hearing in 6 weeks, and I just handed my ex-wife's lawyer the only thing they needed to take my daughter, and I did it because you told me to keep it a secret. So you tell me. Did you set me up? Was I the fall guy this whole time? Just say it. I'd rather know. There was a silence on the line so long that Daniel thought she'd hung up. Then Victoria said in a voice he'd never heard her use, stripped of all the ice, all the armor, raw down to something that sounded almost like fear. No, God, no. Daniel, listen to me. I didn't set you up. Grayson moved faster than I thought he could. He found the access logs before I could put protections in place, and by the time I saw what he was doing, it was already done. I have been on the phone all morning trying to stop it, and I couldn't stop it in time, and I am so sorry, I am so... Her voice broke just slightly, and then hardened into something fierce. But you listen to me now and you hear me. I am not going to let them do this to you. Do you understand? I built this company back up from the ground after the last recession nearly killed it. I know where every skeleton is buried, because I'm the one who had to keep this place alive while men like Grayson were robbing it blind. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's cornered a nobody accountant nobody will believe. He has no idea what's coming. Victoria, I need you to trust me for 6 more weeks. Just 6 weeks. Can you do that? Daniel looked up at the window of his apartment where the light was on, where his daughter was waiting for a father who'd promised her the world and had just been suspended for a crime. "I don't have anyone else to trust," he said. "That's not the same as trusting you. But it's what I've got." "It's enough," Victoria said. "For now it's enough. Go inside. Hug your daughter. Don't tell her anything's wrong. Tomorrow we start fighting back. And Daniel—" "What?" A pause. "That night. The thing you said. The joke." Her voice went soft and strange. "I never told you why I reacted the way I did. There's a reason. And when this is over, if you still want to know, I'll tell you." She hung up before he could answer. Daniel Cole sat in his car in the dark, holding a phone that had gone silent, and realized that the joke he'd been kicking himself over for a week, the joke he'd thought meant nothing, was somehow tangled up in all of this. In her. In whatever she was hiding behind that armor. He didn't understand it yet. But he was going to. That night after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat on the edge of her bed and watched her breathe. She'd known something was wrong. Kids always know. At dinner, she'd gotten quiet, and then she'd climbed into his lap, even though she was too big for it, and she'd said, "Daddy, you have your worried face on. The one from the divorce." "I don't have a worried face." "You do. It's right here." She'd touched the space between his eyebrows. "It goes like this." And she'd scrunched her own small face into an exaggerated frown that was so exactly painfully accurate that Daniel had laughed out loud despite everything. "You're too smart for your own good whale, girl." "I know." She'd leaned her head against his chest. "Is everything gonna be okay?" And Daniel had made her a promise. The kind of promise a father has no right to make, and makes anyway, because the alternative is watching your child be afraid. "Everything's going to be okay," he'd said. "I promise. No matter what happens, you and me, we're a team. And nobody's ever going to break up our team. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Say it back." "Nobody breaks up our team." Now watching her sleep, Daniel repeated it to himself like a prayer. Nobody breaks up our team. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere across the city, Richard Grayson was already making calls. Grayson had discovered that Daniel Cole had a weakness, a daughter, a custody battle, an ex-wife with a wealthy new husband, and a grudge and a lawyer. And Grayson was the kind of man who understood that you don't just destroy an enemy. You take away everything he loves first, so that even if he survives, there's nothing left worth surviving for. Within a week, Sarah's lawyer would receive an anonymous tip about Daniel's suspension. Within 2, a private investigator would begin parking across from Daniel's apartment watching. Within 3, a stranger in a suit carrying an official-looking envelope would knock on Daniel's door in the middle of the afternoon when he knew only an 8-year-old girl would be home to answer it. But that was still to come. For now, there was only a tired man on the edge of a child's bed, and a promise, and the slow dawning understanding that the ordinary life he'd been living, the machine life of wake-up work, come home repeat, was over. Something else had begun. Something with a corrupt CFO on one side and a $14 million fraud in the middle, and a woman who blushed at jokes for reasons she wouldn't explain. Daniel leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "Nobody breaks up our team," he whispered. And then he went to the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and started building the only thing he had left: a copy of every single file he'd ever found. Because Grayson had made one mistake. He'd assumed that when he cut off Daniel's access, he'd cut off Daniel's proof. He hadn't. Daniel Cole had spent 6 years being the last man in the building every night. And a man who stays late alone with nobody watching has plenty of time to make copies. He had all of it. Every invoice. Every phantom vendor, every $1 under the line. And now, with nothing left to lose and everything in the world to protect Daniel Cole, was going to use it. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about a man losing his job. It's about what a good man does when they take everything from him and dare him to stay quiet. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? And stay with me, because in part 2, the stranger knocks on Daniel's door. Victoria makes a choice that will cost her everything, and the real war for the truth begins. The copying took Daniel most of the night. By 3 in the morning, he had every file backed up onto 2 separate drives, one of which he wrapped in a plastic bag and taped inside the water tank behind the toilet. Because he'd watched enough of the world by now to know that a man under investigation should never keep all his proof in one place. When he finally lay down, he didn't sleep so much as wait for the ceiling to turn gray with morning. At 6:40, his phone buzzed. "Victoria, you're awake," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't really do sleep anymore." "Good, because we don't have time for it." Her voice had the clipped speed of someone who'd already been up for hours. "I've hired outside counsel. Not company lawyers, mine. A woman named Renata Cho. She's the best litigator in the state, and she despises men like Grayson on a personal level. She's expecting your call at 9. Write this number down." "Victoria, I can't afford." "I'm paying for it." "No, absolutely not. I'm not letting you—" "Daniel." She cut him off hard. "Listen to me very carefully. This is not charity, and it is not pity. You are the only witness who found the truth, and if they bury you, they bury the truth with you. Protecting you is protecting my entire case. So swallow your pride, because it's the only thing you own right now that I actually need you to lose. Call Renata at 9. Am I clear?" Daniel closed his eyes. "You're clear. I have to go. I have a board pre-meeting in 15 minutes, and I need to walk in there like nothing is wrong." Which, for the record, is the hardest acting I've ever done in my life. A pause, then softer almost against her will. "How's your daughter?" "She knows something's wrong. She always knows." "Kids do." Another pause. "Take care of her, Daniel. That's the whole reason any of this matters." She hung up before he could ask her what she'd meant by that. By any of this, by the way she'd said it, like she was talking about more than a court case. He called Renata Cho at 9 o'clock exactly. The woman didn't waste a single word. "Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the summary Ms. Hale sent me. I'm going to ask you questions, and I need you to answer them like your life depends on the truth, because your custody of your daughter probably does. First question. Did you access those files? Yes. Did you send them to an outside email? Yes, Victoria's. She asked me to. Is there any written record of her asking you to? Daniel's throat went dry. No. She told me to keep it off the servers. No emails. Nothing. There was a silence on the line, and in that silence, Daniel heard his whole future teetering. Okay, Renata said finally. That's a problem, but it's a survivable problem. Here's what you need to understand, Mr. Cole. Right now, it is your word against a Fortune 500 board. That is not a fight you win. So we are not going to fight it that way. We're going to make it impossible for them to move against you without exposing themselves. Do you still have access to the evidence? I have copies of everything. Everything. Every file. Every invoice. 6 years of it. He heard her exhale slowly, and when she spoke again, there was something new in her voice, something that sounded almost like appetite. Mr. Cole, you may have just made my year. Do not tell another living soul you have those copies. Not your ex-wife, not a friend, not the man who fills your gas tank. As far as the world knows, when they revoked your access, they took your teeth. You understand. Let them think you're toothless. It's the most dangerous thing you can be. Why? Because a cornered man with nothing to lose is the most predictable thing on earth. But a cornered man who's secretly holding the knife, he could hear her smile. Nobody sees that one coming. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday, Daniel started to notice the car. It was a gray sedan, nothing special, parked across the street from his building. He noticed it because he noticed things, because 6 years of being the last man in the office and a lifetime of watching people had made him a careful reader of what didn't belong. The car was there in the morning when he walked Emma to school. It was there in the afternoon when he walked her home. The man inside never got out. He just sat sometimes with a phone to his ear. Sometimes with a newspaper he never seemed to actually read. On Thursday morning, Daniel walked Emma to school the long way, doubled back through an alley, and came up on the gray sedan from behind on foot. He tapped on the passenger window. The man inside jumped. "Morning," Daniel said when the window came down 2 inches. "You've been parked here 4 days. This is a residential street. I'm just wondering if maybe you're lost." The man was in his 50s, heavy-set with the flat, unbothered eyes of someone who did this for a living. "I'm not lost." "Then you're watching my building. And since I'm the only person in that building anybody's got a reason to watch, I'm gonna guess you're watching me." "I don't know what you're talking about, pal." "Sure you do." Daniel leaned down so they were eye to eye. His voice stayed very calm, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell whoever's paying you that I saw you, that I know. And you're going to tell them that if they've got a problem with me, they can come talk to me like men at my front door and leave the surveillance for people who've actually done something wrong. But if I ever see you following my daughter, we are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Are we clear?" The man looked at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he rolled up the window, started the car, and drove off. Daniel stood on the sidewalk and watched him go, and only when the car turned the corner did he let his hands start shaking. He called Victoria from the sidewalk. "They're watching me," he said. "There's been a car outside my building for 4 days. A PI, I'm almost sure of it. A private investigator." Victoria's voice went cold and flat. "For the custody case or for Grayson?" "I don't know. Does it matter?" "Both of them want the same thing. They want me to look unstable. A PI sitting outside my apartment is exactly the kind of thing a family court judge—" He stopped. A worse thought had just arrived. "Victoria, what if it's not about making me look bad? What if they're building a schedule, learning when Emma's home, when she's home alone?" The silence on the line stretched long enough that Daniel's chest tightened. "Get her a different route to school," Victoria said finally, and every word came out precise and controlled in a way that told Daniel she was terrified underneath it. "Different times. Change your patterns. And Daniel, I want you to have someone watch your building. I'll arrange it. Someone on our side watching the ones watching you. You keep saying you'll arrange things. You keep spending money. At some point, I have to ask why. Ask me when it's over." "I'm asking you now." Victoria was quiet. And then she said something that landed in Daniel's chest like a stone dropped into deep water. "Because I've spent 20 years being the only person in every room who couldn't afford to need anyone. And you're the first person in a very long time who ever needed me for something other than my signature. I don't know how to explain it better than that, and I don't have time to try. Change Emma's route. I'll call you tonight." She hung up. Daniel stood on the sidewalk holding his phone, and the fear in his stomach got tangled up with something else. Something warmer and more frightening, and he didn't have a name for it yet either. That night Renata Cho called with news. "The custody hearing's been moved up," she said. "Your ex-wife's attorney filed an emergency motion citing a material change in the father's circumstances that endangers the child's welfare." Translation: Mr. Cole, they know you lost your job, and they're moving fast because they want the hearing to happen while you're still under a cloud before you have a chance to clear your name. The new date is 3 weeks out. Daniel sat down slowly at his kitchen table. 3 weeks. I'm going to fight the motion. I might get you a little more time, but I want to be honest with you because you're paying me to be honest, and Ms. Hale is paying me to keep you alive. 3 weeks is not much time to unravel a 6-year fraud and clear your name. It can be done, but it means we don't get to be careful. It means we go now and we go hard. Whatever it takes. Good, because I need you to understand what whatever it takes means. It means we may have to bring your evidence out into the light before Ms. Hale is ready. And when we do, Grayson is going to come after you with everything he has, not just lawyers. Everything. Are you prepared for that? Daniel looked down the hall toward Emma's room, where the nightlight glowed under the door. I lost the job, he said quietly. I lost the reputation. The only thing I've got left to lose is her. So yeah, whatever it takes. Let him come. The next 10 days moved like a held breath. Daniel changed everything. He walked Emma to school by a different route each morning sometimes, with Mrs. Alvarez alongside them, sometimes doubling back the way he had on the PI. He arranged for Emma to be dropped inside the school building into the hands of a teacher never left at the gate. He stopped taking calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He kept the drives, the copies of everything moving, never in the same place 2 nights running. And every night, Victoria called. They were supposed to be strategy calls, and they started that way. But somewhere around the 4th or 5th night, they stopped being only about the case. They'd finish going over whatever Renata had sent, and then there'd be a pause, and neither of them would hang up, and one of them would say something small and human, and the call would keep going. "What was she like?" Daniel asked one night. "You, as a kid. I can't picture it. You seem like you were born in a suit." Victoria laughed, and it was a real laugh, tired and unguarded. "I grew up in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight. My father worked the line at a paper mill for 31 years. My mother cleaned houses. I was the first person in my family to finish college. I put myself through on scholarships and a job at a diner where I learned that the worst thing you can be is a woman who's smarter than the men she's serving coffee to. So how'd you get from there to the corner office? I decided very young that I was never going to be poor again, and I never going to let anyone make me feel small again, and I built armor out of both of those decisions until I couldn't take it off anymore." Her voice went quiet. "You spend enough years being the woman nobody can touch, Daniel, and one day you realize nobody's touched you in a very long time. In any sense of the word." Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't trust his voice. "That's more than I've told anyone in a decade," Victoria said. "So, now you owe me one. Tell me about her, the mother." And Daniel told her. He told her about Sarah, about how they'd married young and hopeful, about how the marriage had slowly hollowed out under the weight of bills and disappointment. He told her about the day Sarah left, how she'd stood in the doorway with a suitcase and said Emma was better off with him for now, and how the word now had been the cruelest word Daniel had ever heard, because it meant Sarah always intended to come back for her when it was convenient. "And now it's convenient," Victoria said softly. "Now she's got a rich husband and a nice house and a lawyer, and Emma's a prop in her comeback story. That's all this is to her. My daughter is a prop." Daniel's voice cracked on the word, and he had to stop. "Daniel." "Yeah, we're not going to let that happen." She said it with such flat, absolute certainty that Daniel believed her the way you believe a promise from someone who has never once broken one. "I don't lose. It's the one thing I'm truly good at, and I have decided that I am not going to lose you." There it was again, that word. You, not this, not the case. You. Neither of them addressed it. But that night, for the first time in a long time, Daniel slept, which is why when the knock came, it caught him completely off guard. It was a Wednesday afternoon, exactly 11 days after he'd confronted the man in the gray sedan. Daniel had run out to the pharmacy 20 minutes no more to pick up Emma's allergy medicine, and Mrs. Alvarez had a doctor's appointment. So, for the first time in weeks, Emma was home alone. Just for 20 minutes. Daniel had done the math and decided 20 minutes was safe. He'd locked the door. He'd told her the rules. Don't open the door for anyone. Not anyone. If someone knocks, you call me. He was in line at the pharmacy when his phone rang. Emma. "Hi, whale girl, I'm almost—" "Daddy." Her voice was small and scared, and it stopped his heart. "There's a man at the door. He has papers. He says he has papers for you, and he needs me to open the door and sign for them." The world went very quiet and very sharp. Emma? Daniel was already walking, leaving his place in line, already moving toward the door of the pharmacy with the phone pressed to his ear so hard it hurt. "Emma, listen to me. Listen to my voice. Are you listening?" "Yes, Daddy." "Do not open that door. Do you understand me? Do not open it no matter what he says. Not for papers, not for anything. But he said it's important." She pronounced it in 3 careful pieces, the way she did with big words, and it broke something in Daniel to hear how the man's words had gotten into her head. He said you could get in trouble if I don't sign. He's lying to you, baby. Grown-ups who tell the truth don't ask little kids to open doors. That's the rule. Remember? That's our rule. Get away from the door. Go to your room and lock it. I'm coming home right now. I'm already in the car. I'm 60 seconds away. He was not 60 seconds away. He was 6 minutes away, and he was running to his car, and his hands were shaking so hard he could barely get the key in the ignition. Daddy, he's knocking again. Don't answer it. Go to your room. He's saying my name. How does he know my name? And that was the moment Daniel Cole's fear turned into something else entirely. Because a process server with real legal papers does not know a child's name. A process server does not stand outside a door coaxing an 8-year-old to open it. This was not a legal document. This was a man who had studied Daniel's family closely enough to know exactly when the girl would be alone and had come to do God knew what, wearing the costume of the law. Emma. Daniel's voice came out low and steady, even as he blew through a yellow light. I need you to be the bravest whale girl in the world right now. Go to your room, lock the door, push your toy box in front of it, and do not come out, not for anybody, until you hear my voice. My voice, Emma. Nobody else's. Can you do that? I'm scared. I know you are, but you're braver than you know. You're braver than me. Now go. Go right now and stay on the phone with me the whole time. He heard her small feet running. He heard a door slam and the click of a lock. He heard the scrape of the toy box. And then through the phone from somewhere on the other side of that locked door, he heard a man's voice. Emma. Emma, honey, you don't need to be scared. I'm a friend of your mom's. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Your mom's. He hit the gas. And at the same moment, in a glass office across the city, a phone rang on Victoria Hale's desk in the middle of the most important board meeting of her career. She almost didn't answer it. The board was in session. Grayson was mid-presentation laying out quarterly projections with the smooth confidence of a man who had no idea the ground was already cracking under him. To take a call now, to walk out now, would be to hand Grayson exactly the appearance of instability he'd been hoping to pin on her. But the screen said Daniel. And Daniel never called during business hours. That had been their rule. He knew what these meetings meant to her. Victoria stood up. Ms. Hale. The chairman of the board looked up surprised. We're in the middle of... I'm aware of what we're in the middle of. She was already moving toward the door, phone in hand. Continue without me. Richard, I'm sure you'd love the floor. She stepped out into the corridor and answered. Daniel, what's wrong? There's a man at my apartment. The words came out fast and ragged, the words of a father driving too fast toward a locked door. He's got Emma cornered. She's alone. Victoria, I stepped out for 20 minutes, and there's a man at the door saying he's a friend of her mother's, coaxing her to open it, and I'm 6 minutes away and I... Where do you live? Victoria was already walking toward the elevator heels, striking the floor like gunshots. Give me your address. Right now. He gave it to her. That's 4 minutes from me. I'm closer than you are. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped in and jabbed the button for the parking garage. I'm coming. Stay on with your daughter. I'll call 911 from the car. What's the man look like? I don't know. I can't see him. Emma said he's got papers. He's wearing a suit. Doesn't matter. I'm coming. And then, in a voice Daniel had never heard from her, a voice with something wild and fierce buried in the control. Nobody touches that little girl. Do you hear me? Nobody. She hung up. And Victoria Hale, CEO of Hartwell Group, who had just walked out of the most important board meeting of her life, handing her enemy the perfect ammunition, ran to her car and drove toward a child she had never met, like the child was her own. Behind her in the boardroom, Richard Grayson watched the door close and allowed himself a very small, very private smile. He had counted on this. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Daniel's life. He kept Emma talking. He asked her about Wales. He asked her the name of the biggest whale, and she said blue whale in a shaky voice, and he asked her how big its heart was, and she said, a person could swim through the arteries, and her voice steadied a little with each fact because facts were solid and safe, and the one thing in the world that couldn't lie to her. Daniel kept her reciting whale facts while he wove through traffic, and the whole time he could hear the man's voice on the other side of her door softer now, more coaxing, more patient. And the patience was the most frightening part of all. Emma, sweetheart, I have something for you. Your mom sent me. Don't you want to see your mom? She misses you so much. Don't listen to him, Daniel said. Whale's baby, tell me about the humpback. Humpbacks sing songs, and the songs change every year, and nobody knows why. That's right. That's my girl. Keep going. Emma, if you just open the door, I can take you to your mom right now. Daddy, he says he can take me to Mommy. He can't, baby. He's lying. Mommy's not with him. This is a bad man playing pretend. Stay in your room. And then mercifully, Daniel heard something else through the phone. A voice he knew. Sharp, furious, absolutely without fear. Victoria, get away from that door. The man's coaxing voice stopped. Who are you? The stranger said. I'm the person who just called the police and gave them a description of your car, which is registered, which means they already know your name. I'd suggest you leave. Now. While walking away is still an option. Lady, I've got legal documents to serve. You've got nothing. Victoria's voice was pure ice, and Daniel, listening through the phone as he screeched around the final corner onto his own street, had never in his life been so grateful to hear anyone. Legal process servers don't stand outside a door talking to an 8-year-old about her mother. I know what you are, and I know who sent you. You go back and you tell him that Victoria Hale answered the door. He'll understand what that means. Now get out before the officers arrive, because I promise you whatever he's paying you, it isn't enough to be the one holding the papers when this comes down. There was a pause, then footsteps moving away fast. Daniel's car came to a stop half up on the curb outside his building, and he was out of it and running before it had fully stopped taking the stairs 3 at a time. And he burst onto his floor to find Victoria Hale standing in the hallway outside his open apartment door, breathing hard, her jacket half off one shoulder, her composure cracked wide open for the first time since he'd met her. He's gone, she said. He ran when I came up the stairs. She's fine, Daniel. She's locked in her room. She's fine. Daniel didn't stop to answer. He went past her into the apartment down the hall and knocked on Emma's door in the way they'd agreed on and said the only words that mattered. It's Daddy. It's my voice, whale girl. It's just me now. The lock clicked. The door opened. And Emma threw herself into his arms and finally started to cry, the way she'd been too scared to cry when the man was still there. And Daniel sank to the floor of the hallway, with his daughter wrapped around him, and held her and said, I've got you. I've got you. I've got you. Until the words stopped meaning anything and started meaning everything. Victoria stood in the doorway and watched them, and something in her face came apart entirely. When Emma's crying finally slowed into hiccups, she peered out from her father's shoulder at the strange, beautiful, disheveled woman standing in her hallway. Who are you? Emma asked. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. And Daniel watched the most powerful woman he'd ever known struggle to find an answer to a question an 8-year-old could ask, and no adult could answer. I'm a friend of your dad's, Victoria said finally. Emma studied her with the merciless clarity of a child. Are you the lady he talks to at night on the phone? The one that makes his voice go different? Victoria's eyes flicked to Daniel, who had gone very red. His voice goes different, Victoria said. Softer, Emma said, like when he reads me stories. And for one long suspended moment in the hallway of a cramped apartment with a fugitive stranger barely gone and the police still on their way and a custody hearing bearing down like a freight train, Daniel Cole and Victoria Hale looked at each other over the head of a crying 8-year-old, and neither of them could think of a single word to say. The police came. Daniel gave a statement. Victoria gave a statement. The officers took down the description of the man, the description of the car, and told Daniel what he already knew, which was that unless the man came back, there wasn't much they could do, but they'd file the report, and it would be on record. That last part mattered more than the officers knew. On record. Renata Cho would want that report. A stranger impersonating a process server to lure a child out of a locked apartment that was a fact that cut in exactly one direction, and it wasn't Daniel's. After the police left, after Emma had finally been coaxed to sleep with 2 stories instead of 1, and the nightlight turned up as bright as it went, Daniel came out to the kitchen to find Victoria still there. She hadn't left. She was sitting at his small table in her expensive clothes in his cramped apartment, holding a cup of the cheap coffee he'd made her because it was the only thing he had to offer. "You should go home," he said. "You've done more than enough. You walked out of a board meeting, Victoria. You realize what that's going to cost you." "I realize exactly what it's going to cost me." She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. "Grayson will use it. He'll tell the board I'm unstable, that I abandoned a fiduciary meeting for a personal matter, that my judgment can't be trusted. He's probably already telling them." She looked up. "And I'd do it again. I'd do it 100 times. So don't ask me if I understand what it cost. I understood before I stood up from the table." "Why?" "You keep asking me that. Because you keep not answering." Victoria set the cup down, and for a long moment she was quiet, and Daniel saw her decide something, saw the armor come off piece by piece, a thing he suspected almost no one had ever watched happen. "When I was 34, she said, "I had a daughter." Daniel went still. Her name was Grace. She was 2. Victoria's voice was steady, terribly steady, the steadiness of someone who has told a story so many times inside her own head that she's worn the shaking out of it. "I was building my career. I was going to be someone. I was always at the office, always on a plane, always one more meeting, one more deal, and my husband stayed home with her, and I told myself that was fine, that I'd slow down soon, that there'd be time later. There's always time later, until there isn't." She looked at her hands. "There was a car accident. I was in Chicago closing a deal that I could not for the life of me tell you a single detail about now. My husband and my daughter were driving to meet me at the airport. A truck ran a light. Victoria. He survived. Grace didn't." She said it plainly, and the plainness was worse than any amount of crying could have been. "She was 2 years old, and I was in a conference room in Chicago closing a deal I don't remember, and my little girl died on the way to see me. And I have spent every single day of the 15 years since building an empire, so I would never have to feel small enough to make a choice like that again. And it worked. I built the armor. Nobody could touch me. Nobody could hurt me because I never let anyone close enough to try." She looked up at Daniel, and her eyes were wet, but her voice never broke. "And then a tired accountant told me the truth about some numbers, and stayed late every night for a daughter he'd never once complained about, and made a stupid joke about staying the night, and I blushed like a schoolgirl, because for the first time in 15 years, I felt something crack in all that armor, and I did not know what to do with it." The kitchen was silent. "So when your daughter was alone," Victoria said quietly, "and there was a man at her door, and you were 6 minutes away, and I was 4, there was no board meeting on earth that could have kept me in that chair. Do you understand now? I was not going to sit in a boardroom while another little girl—" Her voice finally caught just once on the edge of the sentence she couldn't finish. She pressed her lips together and mastered it. "I couldn't save mine. I was going to save yours. That's the answer, Daniel. That's the whole answer. That's why." Daniel didn't move for a long moment, and then he crossed the small kitchen and did the only thing that made any sense, which was to sit down across from her and take her hand. This woman, who never let anyone touch her and hold it and say nothing at all, because some things are too large for words, and the only honest response is to simply not let go. Victoria looked down at their hands. She didn't pull away. "I've never told anyone that," she said. "Not the board, not the magazines. Nobody at that company knows I ever had a child. I made sure of it. Grace is the one thing I kept that they could never turn into a headline." "Then why tell me?" "Because you asked me why. And you're the first person in 15 years I actually wanted to give the real answer to." She turned her hand over so their palms met. "The night you made that joke, can I stay here tonight? For 1/2 of 1 second. Some part of me that I thought died in that car in Chicago woke up and wanted to say yes. Not to the joke. To the idea of it. To the idea of not being alone in that enormous glass office at the top of the world, where I made sure nothing could ever reach me again. And it terrified me so badly I couldn't look at you. That's why I blushed, Daniel. Not because you embarrassed me, because you scared me. You scared me by making me want something. And there it was. The truth behind the blush offered up in a cramped kitchen at midnight, a truth Daniel had turned over in his mind 100 times, and never once come close to guessing. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't say anything at all for a moment. Then he said the only true thing he had. "I'm not going to be the thing that hurts you, Victoria. I don't have it in me. I've been hurt enough to know I never want to do it to anyone else." "I know," she said. "That's the problem. That's exactly the problem. It would be so much easier if you were the kind of man I could stay away from." They sat there, hands together, and neither of them moved to make it more than it was, and neither of them moved to make it less. And then Victoria's phone rang, and the world came crashing back in. She looked at the screen. Her face changed. "It's the board chairman," she said, "at midnight." She looked at Daniel. "That's not good," she answered. "Marcus, it's late." A pause. Daniel watched her listen, watched her face go from wary to still, to something carved out of stone. "I see. And this is a decision the board reached tonight in my absence at Richard's recommendation." Another pause. "Of course he did." Her jaw tightened. "No, I understand perfectly. I'll be there in the morning. Thank you for the courtesy of the call, Marcus. I know it wasn't easy to make." She hung up. She set the phone down on the table with a control so deliberate it was frightening. "What is it?" Daniel said. "Grayson called an emergency session after I left. He told the board I'd walked out of a fiduciary meeting for undisclosed personal reasons, that my judgment was compromised, that there were, and I quote, concerning irregularities in my recent conduct." She laughed, but there was no humor in it at all. "He's calling for a vote of no confidence, tomorrow morning, to remove me as CEO. The kitchen went very quiet. "He's moving now," Daniel said slowly, "because you're exposed. Because you walked out. Because of me. He's moving now," Victoria corrected. "Because I got close to you, and getting close to you meant getting close to the truth, and he could see it happening. Sending that man to your door today wasn't only about your daughter, Daniel. It was bait. He knew I'd been watching your building. He knew if a child was threatened, I'd run. He set a trap, and he baited it with an 8-year-old, and I walked into it with my eyes open, because there was no other choice a human being could make. And now he gets to stand up in front of the board tomorrow and use the most humane thing I've ever done as proof that I'm unfit to lead." Daniel felt something turn over in his chest, something that wasn't fear anymore. It was closer to fury. "So he wins," he said. "Tomorrow morning he stands up, he takes your company, and the second you're out, there's nobody left inside those walls who can protect the evidence, and the whole thing dies. That's his plan." "That's his plan? Then we don't let him have tomorrow morning." Victoria looked at him. "What are you talking about?" Daniel stood up. Something had shifted in him, the same thing that had shifted the day they'd tried to lure his daughter through a locked door. He was done running. He was done being careful. He was done being the toothless man they all assumed he was. "You said it yourself. The second you're gone, the evidence dies with you, so the evidence can't wait for you to be ready. It has to come out before he takes the company. Which means it has to come out tomorrow. In that room. In front of the whole board." He looked at her. "Renata told me whatever it takes, we go now and we go hard. Well, this is now. This is as hard as it gets. You've got an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning where Grayson thinks he's going to remove you and bury me in the same stroke." Daniel's voice dropped low and certain. "So let's give him a meeting he'll never forget. Let's walk in there together and put 6 years of his crimes on the table in front of every person he's been lying to. Let him call for his vote. And then let him explain to that entire board why the man he's accusing of fraud is holding the proof that he's the one who stole $14 million. Victoria stared at him. You have no idea what you're proposing. That room is full of people who owe him. Investors, allies. If we walk in there and we're wrong about even one thing, if the evidence has a single hole in it, he doesn't just win, he buries you so deep you'll never see your daughter again. You're talking about betting Emma's entire future on one meeting. I know exactly what I'm betting, Daniel said. And I'm telling you, I'd rather walk into that room and put everything on the table than sit here and watch him take you down one careful, quiet piece at a time. I've spent 4 years being quiet, Victoria. Being careful. Keeping my head down and hoping the world would notice I was a good man and cut me a break. It never did. Quiet doesn't work. Careful doesn't work. The only thing that's ever worked in my whole life was the moment I looked at a set of numbers that didn't add up and refused to leave it alone. He held out his hand to her. So, are we going to leave it alone, or are we going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and finish this? Victoria looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face, and she saw the tired accountant she'd met a month ago, and she saw something else in him now. Something that had been forged in a pharmacy line and a locked bedroom door, and 4 minutes of the longest phone call of a father's life. She saw a man who had finally completely run out of fear. She stood up. She took his hand. Call Renata, Victoria said. Tell her we go in the morning. Tell her to bring everything. And Daniel. Her fingers tightened around his. Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, whatever it costs me, I want you to know I'm not walking in there to save my company. I stopped caring about that the moment I stood up from that table today. I'm walking in there for the same reason I ran up those stairs. She looked toward the hallway, toward the door, with the nightlight glowing beneath it. I'm walking in there for her. And for you. Because it turns out the one thing all my armor never protected me from was finally finding something worth losing it for. Daniel didn't let go of her hand. Then we go together, he said. Outside across the street, a new car sat in the dark. Not the gray sedan. A different one. And inside it, a man lifted a phone to his ear and said 4 words to the person on the other end. She's still in there. And in a glass office at the top of the world, Richard Grayson listened and set down his own phone and looked out at the city lights. He was so certain would be his by noon the next day, and had no idea, none at all, that the tired accountant he'd dismissed as toothless had spent 6 years alone in an empty office learning to make copies, and was at that very moment on the phone with the best litigator in the state, loading every last bullet for the morning. Renata Cho did not sleep that night, and neither did Daniel. By 2 a.m, the 3 of them were on a conference call. Daniel at his kitchen table. Victoria still across from him, Renata in her office downtown surrounded by open files. And the lawyer was walking them through exactly what a suicide mission looked like when you did it right. I want to be very clear about the odds, Renata said, because I don't take clients into a fire without telling them it's hot. You are proposing to walk into a hostile board meeting, uninvited, with evidence you obtained after your access was revoked, and accuse a sitting CFO of fraud in front of the very people who are about to make him king. If we're wrong about number one date, one signature, Grayson walks out of that room stronger than ever, and both of you are finished. Victoria loses the company for good. Daniel loses his daughter. That's the downside. I need you both to say out loud that you understand it. I understand it, Daniel said. I understand it, Victoria said. Good. Now here's the upside. And Renata's voice changed, sharpened, took on the edge of a woman who had spent her whole career waiting for a case exactly like this one. The evidence isn't wrong. I've been through every file Daniel copied 3 times, and it is the cleanest fraud trail I have ever seen in 22 years of doing this. Grayson was careful about staying under review thresholds, but he was arrogant about the paper. He signed things. He assumed no one would ever look because for 6 years no one did. He built his whole empire on the assumption that the last man in the building every night was too tired and too small to matter. She paused. He picked the wrong last man. Daniel looked at the drawing taped to the wall by his kitchen table, the one Emma had made the house with 3 people and 1 crossed out. He'd moved it there weeks ago without quite knowing why. "So how do we do it?" he said. "We do it in 3 moves," Renata said. "Move 1 is Victoria. She has every right to be in that room. She's still the CEO until the vote passes, and the vote hasn't happened yet. She walks in first, she takes her seat, and she says nothing about any of this. She lets Grayson start his little coup. She lets him call for the vote of no confidence. She lets him lay out every reason she's unfit. She gives him all the rope he wants. And move 2. Move 2 is you." Daniel felt Victoria's eyes on him across the table. The moment before the vote, when Grayson thinks he's won, when he's standing at the front of that room enjoying it, that's when the doors open and Daniel Cole walks in, carrying 6 years of proof that the man calling for that vote is the actual criminal. Not as a rebuttal, as a detonation. "And move 3, Victoria asked. "Move 3, said Renata Cho, "is me. I'll be right outside those doors the whole time, with certified copies already couriered to the State Attorney General's Securities Division and the SEC timestamp tonight, so that the second Grayson tries to claim the evidence is fabricated or stolen or inadmissible, I can inform that board that it doesn't matter what they decide, because the same package they're looking at is already sitting on a federal prosecutor's desk. Their vote won't save him. Their vote will only decide which side of the table they're sitting on when the indictments come. And believe me, nothing focuses a room full of wealthy board members faster than the words accessory and federal." There was a silence on the line. "That's brilliant," Victoria said quietly. "That's 22 years of watching men like Grayson walk," Renata said. "I don't intend to watch one more." They ran it 3 more times. They checked every document. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, Daniel walked down the hall and cracked open Emma's door and looked at his daughter sleeping. And he thought about what he was about to gamble on a single meeting, and his hands started to shake all over again. Victoria appeared in the hallway behind him. "You're scared," she said. It wasn't a question either. "If this goes wrong, I lose her. Not to a bad man at a door. To a judge with a piece of paper." Daniel didn't look away from his sleeping daughter. "I keep thinking, what kind of father bets his kid's whole life on being right? What if I'm the one who doesn't leave things alone? And this time leaving it alone was the smart thing, and I'm too stubborn to see it. Daniel." Victoria turned him gently by the shoulder so he had to look at her. "You want to know what kind of father bets his daughter's future on the truth, the only kind worth being. You could keep your head down and take a plea and hope the system is kind. It won't be. I've watched that system my whole career. It is not kind to tired men without money. The only thing it respects is proof, and you are the only person in this entire city holding the proof. So you're not gambling her future on being stubborn. You're gambling it on being right. And you are right. I've read every page. You're right." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Say it again." "You're right," Victoria said without hesitation. "You've been right since the first night you turned your monitor around and showed me numbers that didn't add up. Everyone in your life told you to leave it alone. Your boss, your ex-wife, that neighbor who told you heroes don't have dental insurance. Every single one of them was wrong and you were right, and tomorrow morning the whole world is going to find out." Her hand came up to the side of his face, the way you'd steady someone standing at the edge of something high. "Now close her door and come drink terrible coffee with me, because in 5 hours we're going to change both our lives, and I don't want to spend the time we have left being afraid." The morning came, whether they were ready or not. Mrs. Alvarez arrived at 7 to stay with Emma, and Daniel crouched down to his daughter's level and held both her hands the way he did when something mattered. "I have to go do something important today, Whale Girl. Something that's going to fix a lot of the things that have been wrong. And when I come home tonight, everything's going to be different. Better different. Do you trust me?" Emma studied his face with those merciless eyes. "Is the bad man from the door going to be there?" "No, baby. But the man who sent him is. And I'm going to make sure he can never send anybody to our door ever again." "Good." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "Get him, Daddy. Nobody breaks up our team." "Nobody breaks up our team," Daniel repeated, and his voice only shook a little. He stood up. Victoria was waiting by the door. She'd gone home for 2 hours to change, and she'd come back. She'd come back to his apartment instead of going straight to the office. And something about the fact that she wanted to walk into the fire beside him instead of meeting him there, undid Daniel a little. "Ready?" she asked. "No," Daniel said honestly. "Let's go anyway." The board of Hartwell Group convened at 9 in the morning. Victoria walked in alone at 8:58. She took her seat at the head of the long table in the chair that was still hers for a few more minutes, and she nodded at the chairman, Marcus Webb, an older man with tired eyes who'd clearly been up half the night wrestling with what he was about to preside over. She nodded at the other members, 12 of them, most of whom wouldn't meet her gaze, and she nodded last of all at Richard Grayson, who sat halfway down the table with a leather folder in front of him and an expression of grave, rehearsed reluctance on his face. "Victoria," Grayson said, warm and sorrowful. "Thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy." "You have no idea what's easy for me, Richard," Victoria said pleasantly, and folded her hands and waited. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. "This is an emergency session of the board. It's been called to address serious concerns regarding executive conduct. Richard, you requested this meeting. The floor is yours. I'd ask that we keep this dignified. Whatever we decide, this woman built a great deal of this company, and she deserves that much." "Of course," Grayson said. He stood. He buttoned his jacket, and he began. He was good. Daniel would give him that later grudgingly, because you had to understand what you were up against. Grayson was smooth and sorrowful and utterly convincing. He spoke about a pattern of erratic behavior. He spoke about Victoria's growing personal involvement with a suspended employee who was himself under investigation for financial crimes. And here he let the implication hang in the air like smoke. The implication that there was something improper, something compromised in the CEO's attachment to a disgraced accountant. He spoke about her walking out of yesterday's fiduciary meeting without explanation. He built it brick by careful brick, a portrait of a woman who had lost her grip, whose judgment could no longer be trusted with the company's future. "I take no pleasure in this," Grayson said, and the terrible thing was that he almost sounded like he meant it. "Victoria and I have worked together for years, but my first duty is to this company and to our shareholders, and I cannot in good conscience stay silent while our leadership deteriorates in front of us. That's why I'm asking this board to do the hardest thing we've ever done. I'm asking for a vote of no confidence. I'm asking us to remove Victoria Hale as CEO effective immediately for the good of everyone who depends on this company for their livelihood." He sat down. The room was silent. Marcus Webb looked down the table at Victoria, and his voice was heavy. "Victoria, you have the right to respond before we vote. Is there anything you'd like to say in your defense?" And Victoria Hale, who could have said 100 things, who could have defended herself, who could have fought, looked at Richard Grayson across the table and gave him the smallest, coldest smile Daniel would later wish he'd been in the room to see. "No," she said. "I don't think I'll be defending myself today, Marcus. I think I'd rather someone else did the talking." And she looked at the doors. Right on cue, they opened. Daniel Cole walked into the boardroom of Hartwell Group carrying a leather folder of his own. He had never been on the executive floor for a meeting in his life. He was a 14th floor accountant, in a suit that didn't fit quite right, a man these people had never once bothered to learn the name of, and for a moment, every head at that table turned toward him, with the mild irritation of powerful people interrupted. And then Grayson saw who it was, and something flickered across the CFO's face, the first crack, the first flash of something that wasn't confident at all. "What is this?" Grayson said. "This is a closed session. This man has no business." "His name is Daniel Cole," Victoria said, "and I've asked him to be here. As the sitting CEO, which I still am for the next several minutes, that's my right. Sit down, Richard." This is exactly the kind of erratic. I said sit down. Grayson sat. Daniel walked to the front of the room. His heart was going so hard he could feel it in his throat, but his hands when he opened the folder were steady. Because Victoria had told him he was right, and he believed her, and a man who knows he's right can do the most frightening thing in the world with steady hands. Good morning, Daniel said to the board. Most of you have never met me. Some of you have probably signed the paperwork suspending me for fraud, without ever once wondering whether it was true. So let me introduce myself. My name is Daniel Cole. For 6 years, I was an accountant on your 14th floor. I was the last man to leave this building almost every single night. And about 6 weeks ago, I found something in the Western distribution accounts that didn't add up. He laid the first document on the table. This is an invoice. Consulting services, $99,999. $1 under the $100,000 threshold that would have triggered a mandatory review by this board. Paid to a vendor called Meridian Logistics Partners. I'd like someone in this room to tell me what Meridian Logistics Partners does, because I've spent 6 weeks looking, and the answer is nothing. It has no offices. It has no employees. It has no trucks, no warehouses, no phone number that a human being answers. It exists on paper, and only on paper for exactly one purpose: to receive money. He laid down the second document. Here's another one. Different vendor, same story. $99,999. And another, and another. He began laying them down one after another, a growing spread of paper across the polished table, and with each sheet, the silence in the room got heavier. $14 million, ladies and gentlemen. $14 million has left this company over the last 6 years. $1 under the review threshold, at a time paid to companies that don't exist for services that were never rendered. And every single one of these payments was authorized by the same office. Daniel laid down the last document. It was a signature page. This one. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room went to the signature, and then slowly, terribly to the man sitting halfway down the table who had signed it. That's absurd, Grayson said, and his voice had lost some of its smoothness. Those are forgeries. This man was suspended for stealing company data. He's under investigation for the exact fraud he's now trying to pin on me. This is a desperate, transparent attempt to save himself by... Richard. Victoria's voice cut through the room. Where did the $14 million go? I don't know what you're... It's a simple question. If these vendors are real, the money paid for real services. So where are the services? Where are the shipments? Where are the trucks? You're the chief financial officer of this company. If someone stole $14 million, you'd know. You'd have caught it. Unless the reason you never caught it is that you're the one who took it. You have no proof of anything except a disgruntled employee's fabrications. Then let's talk about proof, Daniel said, and he opened the folder again. Because this was the part Grayson didn't know about. This was the part not even Victoria had seen until 3 that morning. In 6 weeks of digging, Daniel had found more than invoices. He'd found the other end, the place the money landed after it left the phantom vendors. Meridian Logistics Partners, Daniel said, receives money from Hartwell. And then within 72 hours, every single time Meridian moves that money to a second company. A holding company registered out of state. And that holding company has one listed director. He set down the page. I'll let you all read the name yourselves. A board member near the front picked up the page, read it, went pale, passed it down. The room watched the page travel hand to hand, and watched the color drain out of face after face, until it reached Marcus Webb at the head of the table, who read it and set it down very carefully, and looked up at Richard Grayson with an expression of such profound and final disappointment that it was worse than any anger could have been. Richard, Marcus said quietly, your wife's maiden name is Sutter, isn't it? Grayson said nothing. The holding company is called Sutter Grove Holdings, registered 11 months before the first phantom payment. Sole director listed here in black and white. Marcus's voice did not rise. It didn't have to. Your wife. The room detonated into noise voices, overlapping board members, half standing. Someone demanding to see the document, someone else demanding to call the company's general counsel. And through all of it, Richard Grayson sat very still, and Daniel watched the exact moment the man understood that 6 years of careful, arrogant certainty had just collapsed in 90 seconds, because he'd never once believed the tired accountant on the 14th floor was worth being afraid of. This is... Grayson started, and for the first time the smoothness was entirely gone, and what was left underneath was ugly. This proves nothing. Even if these documents are real, which I dispute, there's no evidence I directed any of it. My wife has her own business interests. This is circumstantial. It would never hold up in court, said a new voice. Every head turned to the doorway. Renata Cho walked in like she'd been waiting her whole life for this exact entrance, which in a sense she had. Forgive the intrusion, Renata Cho, outside counsel. I represent Mr. Cole. She set her own folder on the table. Mr. Grayson, you were about to reassure this board that these documents would never hold up in court. I thought this would be a good moment to inform everyone that as of 2:15 this morning, certified copies of every document Mr. Cole just presented were couriered to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the State Attorney General's Office of Securities Fraud. Time-stamped, logged, received. She smiled pleasantly. So the question of whether they'll hold up in court is no longer hypothetical. There's going to be a court. The only thing this board gets to decide today is whether it acts before the federal government does or after. The room went absolutely silent, and I'd think carefully. Renata continued into that silence. Because there's a legal concept every person at this table should be aware of right now. It's called accessory after the fact. If this board votes today to remove Victoria Hale and elevate Richard Grayson, and it later emerges as it will that you did so after being shown direct evidence of his fraud, then every one of you who voted for it has a very serious problem. You won't be board members who got fooled. You'll be board members who were told and chose him anyway. She let that land. So, by all means, let's have that vote of no confidence Mr. Grayson called for. I'm just not sure it's going to be a vote about Victoria Hale anymore. Marcus Webb stood up slowly. This meeting, he said, is suspended, effective immediately. General counsel and outside counsel will be contacted. Nobody leaves this building until they have. And Richard? He looked down the table, and there was no warmth left in his face at all. You will surrender your access credentials and your company devices to security. Now, in this room, in front of all of us. You can't. I can and I will, and if you make me call security to do it, I promise you it will be worse. Marcus's voice finally cracked with anger. $14 million, Richard. And you sat in that chair yesterday and talked to me about your first duty to the shareholders. You looked me in the eye. My God. He turned away, unable to look at the man any longer. Give security your badge. And that was the moment it broke. Because Richard Grayson cornered exposed, watching his empire come apart in real time did what cornered men do. He stopped defending, and he started attacking, and he swung at the one target he thought was soft. You want to talk about judgment? Grayson said, rising to his feet, his voice climbing. You want to talk about who's fit to lead? Fine. Let's talk about your new CEO's relationship with this so-called whistleblower. Let's talk about the fact that yesterday, in the middle of a fiduciary board meeting, she walked out to go play house at his apartment. Ask her, Marcus. Ask her why the CEO of this company is spending her nights on the phone with a suspended employee. Ask her what's really going on between, I had a daughter. Victoria's voice was quiet, but it stopped Grayson. Mid-sentence stopped the whole room because there was something in it that commanded silence, the way a raised hand couldn't. Her name was Grace. She died 15 years ago when she was 2 years old in a car accident while I was in another city, closing a deal I don't even remember. Victoria stood up. She said it to the whole room, to all of them, in the plain, steady voice of someone laying down a weight she'd carried alone for far too long. I've never told a single person in this building that. I built my entire career making sure none of you ever saw a human being when you looked at me. Because I decided a long time ago that the only way to survive in rooms like this one was to never let anyone know I could be hurt. She turned to Grayson. So, yes, Richard, ask me why I walked out of that meeting yesterday. I'll tell you, and I'll tell the whole board, and I'll tell the SEC if they want to know. I walked out because a man you hired put on a suit and went to Daniel Cole's home and tried to lure his 8-year-old daughter out from behind a locked door by telling her he'd take her to her mother. That's who you sent Richard. That's what you did. You used a child as bait because you knew I'd run. And you were right, I did run because there was a little girl alone and afraid. And I was 4 minutes away. Her voice never rose, and that was what made it devastating. You built your whole plan on the assumption that my caring about that child was a weakness you could exploit. And you were half right. It is the thing that made me walk out of your meeting. It's also the thing that just ended you. Because a woman who's already lost one daughter is not going to sit quietly in a boardroom while you threaten someone else's. The silence that followed was total. And then Marcus Webb, the chairman, looked at Richard Grayson with the last of his patience gone and said 6 words. Security is on their way up. Grayson looked around the table, at 12 board members who would not meet his eyes, at the spread of documents that damned him, at Renata Cho, who was already on her phone, at Victoria standing tall and unbroken at the head of the table, and at Daniel Cole, the tired accountant. The last man in the building, the one he'd been so certain was too small to matter, standing at the front of the room he'd just burned to the ground. Something in Grayson's face finally gave up the pretense. You have no idea what you've done, he said low to Daniel. People like you. You think you've won something. You think the world runs on being right. It runs on power, and you don't have any, and by the time this is over, I'll have lawyers who cost more than you'll earn in your entire life, and I will bury... Maybe, Daniel said. He said it so simply that Grayson stopped. Maybe you'll have expensive lawyers. Maybe you'll drag it out for years. Maybe men like you always land soft. I've watched it happen my whole life, so I won't pretend I don't know how the world works. Daniel took a step toward him. But here's the thing you got wrong about me, Richard. And you got it wrong from the very first day when you told me to stay in my lane. You thought I found these numbers because I wanted power. I didn't. I found them because I've got a little girl at home who thinks her daddy is a good man, and I couldn't stand to look at her every night knowing I'd seen something wrong and decided it was easier to stay quiet. His voice was rock steady now. You spent 6 years being careful because you were afraid of getting caught. I spent 6 years being tired because I was afraid of letting her down. Turns out, that's the stronger fear. It's the one that doesn't quit. You should have been more afraid of a father than of an auditor. The doors opened, and 2 security officers came in. Nobody said anything as they escorted Richard Grayson out. He didn't fight it. At the door he paused and looked back one last time, and for just a moment the mask was entirely gone, and what was underneath was just a small, frightened, ordinary man who'd stolen $14 million because he'd convinced himself he deserved it, and Daniel felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, something closer to sorrow. For all of it. For how ordinary evil turned out to be up close. And then Grayson was gone, and the doors closed, and the boardroom of Hartwell Group let out a breath it had been holding for 6 years. Marcus Webb sat down heavily. He looked at the documents on the table, and then he looked at Daniel, and then he looked at Victoria, and when he spoke his voice was thick. Victoria, I owe you an apology this company will spend a long time trying to earn back. We came in here this morning ready to remove you on the word of a thief. If this man, he gestured at Daniel and corrected himself, if Mr. Cole hadn't walked through that door, we'd have made him king and thrown you out, and we'd have congratulated ourselves for our good judgment. He shook his head slowly. How close we came. My God, how close we came. You came exactly as close as he wanted you to, Victoria said, but there was no cruelty in it. That's how men like Grayson work. They don't fool fools. They fool good people who trust the wrong voice in the room. Marcus turned to Daniel. Mr. Cole, your suspension is rescinded effective immediately. The fraud charges against you will be withdrawn obviously, and this board will be issuing a formal statement clearing your name, which I will personally see is worded strongly enough that no one anywhere ever again questions your integrity." He paused. "And I suspect that matters to you for reasons beyond your career." "There's a custody hearing," Daniel said quietly. "In 2 weeks. My daughter. Then you'll have whatever you need. A letter from this board. My personal testimony if it helps. Whatever a court requires to understand that the man in front of it isn't a criminal, he's the person who stopped one." Marcus stood and extended his hand across the table. "Thank you, son. On behalf of every employee in this building who'll still have a job because you didn't leave it alone." Daniel shook his hand. And it was only then, with the danger past and the room emptying and the impossible thing done, that the enormity of it finally reached him and his legs went slightly unsteady, and he had to put a hand on the table. Victoria was beside him before he'd even fully registered he needed it. "Sit down," she said quietly, just for him. "You did it. You can fall apart now. It's allowed." "I'm okay." "You're not. You've been running on fear and coffee for 6 weeks, and you just walked into a room full of the most powerful people in this city and dismantled a man who was about to take everything from you. You're allowed to not be okay for a minute." Her hand was on his back. "I've got you. That's how it works now, remember? You had my daughter's story before I'd told another living soul. You get to have this. I've got you." Daniel looked at her. "It's really over," he said. "Isn't it? He's actually gone." "He's gone." Victoria's voice was soft. "It's really over." But she was wrong about that. Because at that exact moment, 20 miles away, in a beautiful house paid for with another man's money, a phone rang and a woman named Sarah answered it. And a lawyer's voice on the other end said, "We have a problem. The father's been cleared. The whole thing collapsed this morning. Grayson's finished, and worse, there's a paper trail, and your name is on some of the emails coordinating the timing of the custody filing with his people." Sarah listened to me carefully. "If this goes the way I think it's about to go, you're not going to lose the custody case. You're going to be named in a federal investigation." And Sarah Daniels' ex-wife, who had left her daughter 4 years ago with the word now, who had come back not out of love, but out of vanity, and who had made the catastrophic mistake of letting Richard Grayson's people help her build a case against the father of her child, sat down slowly in her beautiful borrowed house and understood for the first time that the walls were about to come down on her too. Back in the boardroom, Daniel Cole let Victoria Hale steady him and had no idea that the last hardest fight was still to come, not in a boardroom, but in a courtroom over the only thing in the world he'd never been willing to gamble: his daughter. But that was 2 weeks away. For right now, in this moment, in a room where the impossible had just happened, Daniel let himself lean just slightly into the woman who'd promised she had him. And Victoria Hale, who had spent 15 years making sure no one ever got close enough to lean, held him up and found that she was not afraid of the weight at all. The 2 weeks between the boardroom and the courtroom should have been the easiest of Daniel's life. His name was cleared. His job was restored. The story of how a 14th floor accountant had brought down a corrupt CFO had gone quietly around the company and then less quietly into the business press. And yet Daniel barely slept because the only thing that had ever truly frightened him was still 2 weeks away, sitting on a docket waiting. Renata Cho came to his apartment 3 days after the boardroom to talk about the custody hearing, and the first thing she did was set a document on his kitchen table and say, "Before we talk strategy, you need to see this. And I need you to stay calm while you read it, because your first instinct is going to be to do something that would feel very good and cost you everything." Daniel read it. It was an email chain, and his ex-wife's name was on it. "These came out of the Grayson discovery," Renata said. "When the SEC seized his communications, they found more than the fraud. They found this. Sarah's attorney was coordinating the timing of your custody filing with Grayson's people. The emergency motion, the one that moved your hearing up, the one filed the same week you were suspended, that timing wasn't a coincidence, Daniel. Grayson fed your ex-wife's lawyer the information about your suspension the same day it happened. He wanted your custody fight and your fraud investigation to detonate at the same moment so that each one would make the other look worse. Your ex-wife agreed to it. She let a man she'd never met use her daughter's custody as a weapon in his corporate war, because it also happened to get her what she wanted. Daniel set the paper down very carefully because his hands wanted to crush it. "She knew," he said. "She knew a man was watching our building. She knew someone went to our door and tried to get Emma to open it. Did she know that too?" "I don't have proof she knew about the man at the door specifically," Renata said, and her carefulness told Daniel everything. "But she was coordinating with the people who sent him. Whether she knew the exact tactic or chose not to ask, I'll let you decide which is worse." Daniel stood up and walked to the window and stood there for a long time with his back to the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "She used our daughter. She let them use our daughter as bait, and then she filed papers saying I was the unstable one, that I was the danger." He turned around. "Renata, in the hearing, can we use this?" "That," said Renata Cho, with the smile of a woman who had waited 2 decades for cases like this, "is exactly what we're going to do. But not the way you want to. You want to walk into that courtroom and burn her down. I understand the impulse. Resist it. Because here's what a good family court judge sees when a father shows up angry and vengeful. They see a man who might not be able to keep his own rage away from the child. So we are not going to be angry. We are going to be calm and clear and devastating. We're going to let the facts do the burning, and we're going to keep your hands clean because those hands are the ones that are going to raise that little girl." Daniel nodded slowly. "Calm, clear, devastating. Now you're learning." That night, after Emma was asleep, Victoria came over. She'd been coming over most nights now, not for strategy anymore. There was no strategy left to run on the fraud, but because the space between them had quietly stopped being about the case. She brought dinner sometimes. She sat at the small kitchen table that had hosted the collapse of an empire. And on this night, Daniel told her about the emails about Sarah, about what he now knew. Victoria was silent for a long moment. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. "Not for the hearing, right now. Are you all right?" "I keep thinking about Emma asking me why Mommy doesn't live with us," Daniel said. 4 years of that. 4 years of not having a good answer, of protecting Sarah in my answers, because I didn't want Emma to grow up hating her own mother. I always told her, Mommy loves you, she just can't be here right now. I built a kind version of Sarah for my daughter to believe in, and the whole time, his voice caught. The whole time Sarah was the kind of person who'd let a stranger try to lure Emma out from behind a locked door if it helped her win. I protected the wrong person. For 4 years I protected the wrong person. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't protect Sarah," she said. "You protected Emma. You gave your daughter a mother she could love because a child who believes her mother loves her grows up stronger than a child who knows the truth too young. That wasn't weakness, Daniel. That was you carrying a weight so your little girl wouldn't have to. You've been doing that her whole life." She squeezed his hand. "But you don't have to carry Sarah's weight anymore. That's the part that's over. Whatever happens in that courtroom, you never have to protect that woman again." Daniel looked at their hands on the table. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Showing up. Every night. Holding my hand across this table like it's the most natural thing in the world." He looked up at her. "A month ago, you were the most untouchable person I'd ever met. Now you're in my kitchen eating takeout off a chipped plate telling me how to survive losing my daughter. What happened to you, Victoria?" She was quiet. "You happened to me," she said finally. "You and a locked bedroom door and a little girl reciting whale facts to keep from crying. I spent 15 years believing the safest thing a person can be is untouchable. And then I watched a man who has nothing, no money, no power, no armor, nothing but a daughter, and a stubborn refusal to leave things alone, walk into a room and beat someone who had all of it. And I understood that I had it exactly backwards my whole life. The untouchable ones aren't the strong ones. They're just the ones who've decided to be alone." Her thumb moved slowly over the back of his hand. "I don't want to be untouchable anymore, Daniel. I'm too tired to be alone at the top of the world. I've been too tired for years. I just never had a reason to admit it until I met a man who wasn't afraid to be tired out loud." Daniel didn't say anything. He turned his hand over so their fingers laced together, and they sat like that in the small kitchen, and neither of them moved to make it more, and neither of them moved to make it less. The same as they had that night weeks ago, except that everything between them was different now, and both of them knew it. The morning of the hearing came gray and cold. Daniel dressed Emma in her nicest dress, the one with the little whales on it that she'd picked herself, and he crouched down and fixed her collar and tried to find the words. "Today," he said, "some people are going to ask a judge to decide where you should live. Do you understand what that means?" Emma's face got very serious. "It means Mommy wants me to live with her." "That's part of it, yeah." "Do I have to?" "That's what the judge decides, Whale Girl. Not you, not me, not Mommy. A judge." Daniel kept his voice steady, even though every word cost him. "But there's a thing called a judge sometimes talking to the kid. In private. Just you and the judge, no parents. And if that happens, I want you to do something for me. I want you to tell the truth. Whatever the truth is, even if you think it might hurt my feelings. Can you do that?" Emma looked at him with those merciless, honest eyes. "The truth is, I want to live with you," she said. "That's not going to hurt your feelings. That's going to make you happy." Daniel had to look away for a second so she wouldn't see his eyes. "The truth," he managed, "is always the right answer. That's the whole lesson, baby. That's everything I know. You tell the truth and you let the pieces fall where they fall." The courtroom was smaller than Daniel expected. Family court always is. There's no jury, no gallery of spectators, just a judge and the lawyers and the wreckage of a family laid out on a table. Sarah was already there when Daniel arrived, seated beside her attorney, and she looked beautiful and expensive and completely composed. And for one moment their eyes met across the room, and Daniel saw absolutely nothing familiar in them. Whoever he'd married a decade ago was gone. This was someone else wearing her face. Trevor, the wealthy new husband, sat behind her. He would not look at Daniel at all. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Ellen Barrett, with reading glasses and the weary, watchful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years watching parents tear each other apart over children who deserved better from both of them. She had read the filings. She missed nothing. Sarah's attorney went first, and he was good, and he was smooth, and Daniel recognized the type immediately, because he'd just watched Grayson do the exact same thing in a boardroom 2 weeks before. He painted a picture. A father working 60-hour weeks, a child raised partly by a neighbor, a cramped apartment, financial instability. And then the centerpiece, the thing they'd built the whole case around, a father who had recently been suspended from his job under investigation for financial crimes. "Your Honor," the attorney said, "we're not here to disparage Mr. Cole as a person. We're here because a child deserves stability. And with all due respect to the father's affection for his daughter, affection is not stability. My client can offer this little girl a secure home, a two-parent household, financial security, and a mother's love. We're simply asking the court to consider what environment truly serves the child's best interests." He sat down satisfied, and Renata Cho stood up. "Your Honor," she said. "Opposing counsel raised the matter of my client's suspension and investigation. So let's begin there, because I think the court will find it illuminating." She approached the bench and laid down a document. "This is a formal statement from the Board of Directors of Hartwell Group issued 11 days ago. I'd direct the court's attention to the highlighted section which states, and I'm quoting, that Daniel Cole was not only fully cleared of all allegations, but that he personally uncovered and exposed a $14 million fraud being perpetrated by the company's chief financial officer. The suspension opposing counsel just described to you as evidence of instability was in fact retaliation. My client was suspended because he found the truth, and powerful people wanted him silenced." The judge read the document. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a significant clarification," Judge Barrett said. "Counsel, were you aware of this development when you filed your characterization of Mr. Cole's employment situation?" Sarah's attorney stood smoothly. "Your Honor, we were aware the suspension had been rescinded, but the underlying pattern of instability—" "Sit down for a moment, counsel." The judge turned back to Renata. "You said powerful people wanted him silenced. That's a strong phrase for a family court. I'd caution you against theatrics. It's not theater, Your Honor, Renata said. And with the court's permission, I'd like to explain why it's directly relevant to the question of this child's welfare. Because the man who wanted my client silenced didn't stop at his job. She laid down a second set of documents. These emails were obtained through the SEC's investigation into the fraud my client exposed. They are now part of the federal record. I'd ask the court to read the highlighted exchanges, particularly the dates. The judge read. The courtroom was very quiet, and Daniel watched Judge Ellen Barrett's face change, watched 30 years of professional composure give way to something colder as she read an email chain in which the corrupt CFO's people and Sarah's own attorney coordinated the exact timing of this custody filing to coincide with Daniel's suspension, so that the fraud investigation and the custody fight would each make the other look worse. Judge Barrett set these documents down. She took off her reading glasses, and she looked at Sarah's attorney with an expression that made the man visibly shrink. "Counsel," she said, and her voice was dangerously calm. "Am I to understand that the emergency motion you filed to accelerate this hearing, the motion that landed on my desk, citing an urgent change in the father's circumstances, was timed in coordination with the very people who manufactured that change in circumstances, Your Honor? My client had no knowledge of the specifics of, I didn't ask about your client yet. I asked about you." The judge's voice could have frozen the room. "These emails have your firm's name on them. You coordinated the timing of a custody proceeding in my court with a party under federal investigation for fraud in order to manipulate this court's perception of a fit parent. Do you understand how serious that is? Do you understand that I am now obligated to report this to the state bar?" The attorney had gone gray. "Your Honor, Sit down." He sat. And then Judge Barrett turned to Sarah, and her voice changed again, not colder, but heavier. The voice of a woman who had seen this exact story too many times. I'm sorry you go by your married name now. Mrs. Aldridge, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer, because there's a great deal at stake, and I will know if you're not being honest with me." She leaned forward. "Did you know that people connected to this fraud were surveilling your daughter's home?" The courtroom held its breath. And Sarah, beautiful, composed Sarah, hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. "I didn't know the details," she said. "That's not what I asked. I knew there was, I was told there would be some pressure applied to strengthen the case. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know." "You didn't want to know," Judge Barrett repeated slowly, "whether the pressure being applied to help you win custody of your daughter involved your daughter's safety." Sarah said nothing, and her silence was the loudest thing in the room. Daniel felt Renata's hand on his arm under the table, a quiet warning. "Stay calm. Let it happen. Don't say a word." And it took everything he had, because everything in him wanted to stand up and shout. "A man went to our door. A man told my 8-year-old he'd take her to you, and you didn't want to know." But he stayed silent, because Renata was right, because the facts were doing the burning, and his job was to be the calm, steady man a judge could imagine raising a child. Judge Barrett sat back. "I've been doing this for a long time," she said to the whole room, to no one. "And I want to say something that I'm not required to say, but that I think needs saying. This court exists to serve the best interests of a child, not the ambitions of a parent, not the strategies of a lawyer, not the schemes of a corporate criminal who apparently saw a custody case as one more chess piece in his fraud." Her eyes moved to Sarah. "Mrs. Aldridge, 4 years ago, you left this child with her father. That in itself, this court does not judge. People's lives are complicated, and circumstances change, and a parent who steps away and comes back can absolutely be a fit parent. I've reunited many families. I would have been open to it. If you had come to me with clean hands and an honest heart, I would have listened." She let that sit. "But you didn't come with clean hands. You came in coordination with people who surveilled your daughter, who sent a stranger to her door, and you have just told me under oath that you chose not to ask what was being done in your name because you didn't want to know." That tells me something about the best interests of this child that no financial statement or two-parent household can outweigh. The judge's voice was final now. A stable home is not made of square footage and household income. It's made of a parent who puts the child's safety above their own wants every single time, without exception. This court has seen clear evidence of one parent who does that, and troubling evidence about another. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, I love my daughter. I don't doubt that you feel something you call love. Judge Barrett said, not unkindly. But love that lets a child be used as leverage is not the love a court can build a custody arrangement on. I'm sorry, Mrs. Aldridge, I truly am. This isn't a happy day for anyone. She turned to the room. I'm denying the petition for change of custody. Primary physical and legal custody remains with the father, Daniel Cole. She looked at Daniel directly for the first time. Mr. Cole, I'm also, based on what I've seen today, going to significantly restrict the mother's unsupervised access pending the outcome of the federal matter and a full evaluation. That's not permanent. It depends on choices she makes going forward. But for right now, your daughter stays with you and stays safe, and that is the ruling of this court. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. He'd braced so hard for the other outcome for years he'd lived with the low background hum of what if they take her? That for a moment his body couldn't understand that the thing he'd feared most in the world had just been lifted off him. And then it hit him all at once, and he put his hand over his mouth, and he wept silently in a courtroom in front of everyone, because there are some things a man can't hold in, no matter how many rules he has about not crying. Renata's hand was on his shoulder. You did it, she said quietly. You told the truth, and you let the pieces fall, and they fell exactly where they should have. Sarah was crying too at the other table, but it was a different kind of crying, and Daniel, even now, even after everything, felt a strange, exhausted pity for her. She had traded her own daughter for a chance to look good, and she had lost both. There was no triumph in watching it. There was only the tiredness of understanding finally and completely that some people damage themselves worse than you could ever damage them. He gathered himself. He wiped his face. And as he stood to leave, Sarah caught his eye across the courtroom one last time. Daniel, she said. Her voice was small. Will you tell her I'm sorry, Emma? Will you tell her? And Daniel stopped, and he thought about all the years he'd built a kind version of Sarah for his daughter to believe in, and he made a decision that surprised even himself. I'll tell her you love her, he said quietly. I've been telling her that her whole life, and I'll keep telling her because she deserves to grow up believing it, and because being angry at you would only ever hurt her, not you. But Sarah, his voice hardened just slightly, you need to earn the right to see her again. Not through lawyers, not through schemes. The way everyone earns it. By showing up honestly for years and asking for nothing and proving you've changed. If you ever do that, I won't stand in the way. But I'm not going to protect you to her anymore. I'm just going to leave the door open, and it's going to be up to you whether you ever walk through it like a real person instead of a lawyer's strategy. He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, and his daughter was waiting in the hall with Mrs. Alvarez. And the moment Emma saw his face, she knew she just knew the way she always knew everything. I get to stay with you, she said. You get to stay with me, whale girl. Forever? For as long as forever gets. And Emma launched off the bench and into his arms, and Daniel Cole held his daughter in the hallway of a family court and felt for the first time in 4 years the low background hum of fear go completely silent. That should have been the end of it, the good ending. The man clears his name, keeps his daughter, and the credits roll. But there was one more thing to break, and it broke that same week, and it broke in a place Daniel didn't see coming. It broke at Hartwell Group, because it turned out that exposing a $14 million fraud does not make a company grateful. Not really. Not the parts of a company that matter, which are the investors, and the investors of Hartwell Group did not respond to the news of Grayson's arrest with relief. They responded with panic. The stock dropped. Analysts downgraded. And in the boardroom where Victoria Hale had stood beside Daniel and refused to let a good man be buried, A new conversation had begun, a quieter, uglier one, about whether the woman who'd exposed the scandal was now a liability for having exposed it. Daniel found out when Victoria came to his apartment that Friday night, looking like something inside her had gone hollow. "They're not going to fire me," she said, before he could even ask. "That's the joke of it. Marcus fought for me. The board can't fire the person who caught the fraud. It would look monstrous, so they're not going to fire me." She set down her bag. "They're just going to make it impossible for me to lead. They've already started. Meetings I'm not invited to. A new oversight committee with veto power over my decisions." A message very politely delivered that the investors would feel more comfortable if the face of the company weren't so associated with the scandal. They want me to stay in the chair and be quiet. To be the CEO who caught the criminal and then never speaks of it again, so everyone can move on and pretend Hartwell was always clean. "They want you to bury it," Daniel said slowly. "They want me to bury it. A softer, slower burial than the one Grayson planned for you, but the same idea. Smile sign. The papers protect the stock price and never remind anyone that this company let a man steal $14 million for 6 years because nobody wanted to look." Victoria sat down heavily. "I built this company back from nearly nothing. I gave it 15 years. And now the price of staying is agreeing to be silent about the exact thing I risked everything to expose." Daniel sat down across from her at the same table where she'd once told him he was right. "So what are you going to do?" he said. And Victoria Hale looked at him, and something in her face settled not into defeat, but into a clarity that Daniel recognized, because he'd felt the same thing himself the night he decided to walk into that boardroom. "You want to know the strangest part," she said. "For 15 years that chair was the only thing I had. It was my whole identity. Losing it used to be the thing I was most afraid of more than anything, because if I wasn't the untouchable CEO, then I was just a woman who let her daughter die while she closed a deal." Her voice was quiet and steady. "But I'm not that woman anymore. Somewhere in the last 2 months, sitting at this chipped table, eating takeout off cracked plates, watching a tired man refuse to leave the truth alone, I stopped being that woman. And now the board is offering me the thing I used to be most afraid of losing, if I'll just agree to become the thing I spent my whole life running from." Silent. Complicit. A person who saw something wrong and decided it was easier to stay quiet. She looked at Daniel. "You taught me that's the one trade that isn't worth it," she said. "You lost your job rather than make it, so how could I possibly keep mine by making it?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Victoria, don't do it for me. Don't throw away 15 years because of something I'm not doing it for you." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm doing it because you were right, and being right changed me, and I can't unchange back just because staying changed would cost me something. That's the whole point, Daniel. That's the thing you knew before I did. The cost is exactly what makes it mean something." She took a breath. "I'm going to resign. Monday. On my terms publicly, with a statement that says exactly why that I won't lead a company that wants to bury the truth it should be proud of catching. And then I'm going to walk out of that glass office at the top of the world, and for the first time in 15 years, I'm going to be free." The kitchen was silent. "You're going to lose everything you built," Daniel said quietly. "No," Victoria said, and she smiled, a real one, the kind she almost never gave away. "I'm going to lose a building. There's a difference. It took me a long time and a tired accountant to learn it, but there's a difference. I already lost the only thing that a building can't replace 15 years ago in Chicago, and I spent all that time believing the building was what I had left." Her hand tightened on his. "It turns out that's backwards too. The building was never what I had. This table. Your daughter's Whalefax. A person who holds my hand across a chipped plate and doesn't want anything from me, except that I keep being the person I finally became." She looked at him. "I'm not losing everything, Daniel. For the first time in 15 years, I'm choosing what to keep." And Daniel Cole, who had spent 6 weeks being held up by this woman, finally got to be the one holding on. He came around the table and he pulled her up out of the chair and he wrapped his arms around Victoria Hale. Untouchable, unbreakable Victoria Hale, who had let a stranger's daughter reach a place 15 years of armor had sealed shut, and she let him. She leaned all the way in, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, because some things are too large for words. Down the hall, a bedroom door creaked open. Small feet padded into the kitchen. And Emma Cole, in her whale pajamas, rubbing one eye, stopped in the doorway and looked at the two grown-ups holding on to each other in the middle of the night. "Are you sad or happy?" Emma asked. "Because it looks like both." Victoria laughed, wiping her eyes, and crouched down to the little girl's level. "Both," she said. "Sometimes the best things are both, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to be a little sad about the thing you're leaving to make room for the thing you're choosing." Emma considered this with tremendous seriousness. Then she walked over and she took Victoria's hand, the same hand Daniel had been holding, and she said with the total certainty of an 8-year-old who has decided something, "You should choose us. We have whale facts, and Daddy makes good pancakes on Sundays, and nobody breaks up our team, but you're allowed to join it. That's different." And Victoria Hale, CEO of nothing. As of Monday. Free as of Monday. Terrified and unarmored and more alive than she'd been in 15 years, looked at the little girl holding her hand, and then up at the tired man, who'd refused to leave the truth alone, and understood that the thing she'd been most afraid of losing had never been the building at all. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll join the team." And outside the city went on, indifferent and enormous, with no idea that in one small apartment, with a chipped table and a crossed-out drawing taped to the wall, 3 people who had each been alone in their own separate ways had just quietly stopped being alone. Victoria resigned on Monday, exactly as she said she would. She did it in front of the same board that had wanted her to stay silent, and she did it without a single note in her hand, because a woman who has finally stopped being afraid doesn't need to read her courage off a page. She thanked them for 15 years. She told them she was proud of what she'd built, and prouder of what she'd exposed. And then she said the sentence that would be quoted in every business article written about her for the next month. "I will not lead a company that is more ashamed of catching a thief than it was comfortable being robbed." And she set her badge on the table, the same way Grayson had been forced to set down his. Except that she did it standing tall of her own free will, and she walked out of the glass office at the top of the world without looking back once. Daniel was waiting for her in the lobby. He hadn't told her he'd be there. He'd taken the morning off, dropped Emma at school, and driven to the Hartwell building and stood in the marble lobby he'd walked through 5,000 times as a nobody. And he waited because it seemed wrong to him that a woman should do the bravest thing of her life and then ride the elevator down alone. When the doors opened and she saw him standing there, Victoria stopped. "What are you doing here?" she said. "You held me up in that boardroom," Daniel said. "Seemed only fair somebody was down here to catch you when you came out." And Victoria Hale, who had just walked away from everything she'd spent her adult life building, crossed that marble lobby and put her face against Daniel Cole's shoulder. And for a moment, the untouchable woman just breathed, and Daniel held her, and the security guard who'd once escorted him out of this very building watched from across the lobby and had the good grace to look away. "It's done," she said into his shoulder. 15 years. It's done. "How do you feel?" She pulled back and looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling, and it was the strangest, freest expression Daniel had ever seen on her. "Terrified," she said. "Completely terrified. I have no title, no office, no idea what I'm doing tomorrow. For the first time since I was 22 years old, I don't know who I am." She laughed a little wildly. "And I feel lighter than I've felt in 15 years. How is that possible? How can you be terrified and free at the same time?" "You get used to it," Daniel said. "That's just what it feels like to be a regular person, Victoria. Welcome down." The months that followed were not easy. Daniel wouldn't have lied to Emma about it, so he didn't lie to himself either. There were hard weeks. Victoria had money, she wasn't poor. She'd been a CEO, but money isn't the same as knowing what to do with your one wild life once you've set down the only identity you ever had. She was restless. She'd wake at 5 in the morning out of 15 years of habit and have nowhere to go. She sat in on Emma's parent-teacher conferences and helped with 4th grade math homework and slowly awkwardly learned how to be a person instead of a position. And somewhere in those hard months, an idea started to grow. It began at the chipped kitchen table, the way most things between them did. Victoria was reading about a small logistics company going under, good workers, honest business, crushed by a bigger competitor that undercut them, and then planned to lay off every employee the moment the acquisition closed. "That's 300 people," she said, staring at the article. 300 people who did nothing wrong except work for a company that couldn't fight dirty. They'll all be gone by summer. She set the tablet down. "I know that business, Daniel. I know that industry cold. I could save it. I could buy it, keep every worker and run it clean." She said it almost to herself, testing the shape of the idea. "I could build something small, something honest, something where the last man in the building every night doesn't have to become a criminal to get someone to listen to him." Daniel looked at her over his coffee. "Then do it." "It's a huge risk. It could fail. I could lose most of what I have." "You already walked away from the safe thing once," Daniel said. "How'd that feel?" Victoria was quiet. And then she smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who has just given herself permission. "Free," she said. It felt free. She named the company Grace Logistics. She never explained the name to the press or the employees or anyone at all. It went into the incorporation papers and onto the sign above the door, and nobody knew what it meant except Daniel, who understood the first time he saw it and had to leave the room for a minute so she wouldn't see his face. A woman who had spent 15 years making sure no one ever knew she'd had a daughter had just put that daughter's name on the front of everything she was building. It was the least armored thing a person could possibly do. It was Victoria Hale finally completely letting the world see the wound she'd spent her whole life hiding and turning it into something that would keep 300 families fed. She bought the failing company. She kept every worker. She raised the lowest wages first, the ones nobody ever raised. And when it came time to name a director of operations, the person who would actually run the day-to-day, who would make sure the numbers were honest and the workers were treated right, and nothing ever again got buried $1 under the threshold. There was only ever one name on the list. "I want you," she told Daniel. "And before you say it's because of us, it's not. I've watched you. I've watched how you treat people, how you can't leave a wrong number alone, how every single person in your life trusts you completely. I have hired a lot of people in 15 years, Daniel. I have never once been able to hire integrity. It's the one thing you can't put in a job posting. And you have more of it than anyone I've ever met." She paused. "But I understand if it's strange. Working together. Us." "Victoria," Daniel said. "You gave up an empire because I taught you not to bury the truth. I think we can figure out how to share an office." He took the job. Not because of connections. He'd spent his whole life watching men get things through connections, and it had made him sick every time. He took it because for the first time in his life, someone was offering him something for exactly the reason he'd always wanted to be valued, because he was honest and everyone knew it, and it finally counted for something. Emma flourished. That was the thing Daniel noticed most in the end. Not the new house, though they got one eventually, a real house with a yard, with room for a child to run. Not the steady paycheck or the end of the grocery receipt math. What Daniel noticed was that his daughter had stopped scrunching her face into the worried expression she'd learned from watching him during the divorce. She didn't ask anymore why Mommy didn't live with them, because Sarah, to her small limited credit, had actually started doing the thing Daniel told her to do. Showing up. Slowly. Honestly. Supervised visits at first, then a little more. Earning it back one honest Saturday at a time. It would never be what it should have been. But it was something, and Emma got to grow up with a mother who was trying, which was more than Daniel had dared hope for in that courtroom. And Emma got something else too. She got Victoria, not a replacement mother. Nobody tried to make her that, and Emma wouldn't have allowed it anyway. She was far too sharp. What Victoria became was harder to name and maybe more valuable. She became the grown-up who taught Emma that a woman could run a whole company. She became the one who took Emma to the aquarium 4 times in 1 year, because a child who loves whales should get to see them, and who stood at the glass beside her reciting facts, back that Emma had taught her, until the two of them knew more about blue whales than any two people had any reason to. She became, in the particular way that matters most to children, someone who chose to be there. Every day. On purpose. She chose us, Emma said to Daniel, once matter-of-factly drying dishes. Remember, she said sometimes you have to be sad about the thing you're leaving to make room for the thing you're choosing. She chose us. She did Whale Girl. That's better than having to, Emma said, with the devastating wisdom of a 9-year-old. Mommy had me because I'm hers. Victoria picked us. Picking is better. Daniel had to put down the plate he was drying. The evening that ended it all, that closed the circle, came almost a year to the day after a tired accountant made a stupid joke in a boardroom late at night. They were unpacking books in Victoria's new home. She'd finally sold the sterile glass condo she'd lived in for a decade, the one that had never had a single photograph in it, and bought a real house nearby close enough that Emma could ride her bike between the two. Close enough that the line between 2 homes and 1 family had gotten comfortably, beautifully blurred. Daniel was there helping her unpack the way you help someone you've stopped being able to imagine your life without. And there were boxes everywhere, and Emma was asleep on the couch under a blanket, after insisting she absolutely was not tired, and it was late, and Daniel was tired in the good way. Now the way that comes from work. That means something, instead of work that just wears you down. He was shelving a stack of Victoria's books when he found it. Tucked between 2 heavy business volumes, pressed flat and protected, was a single photograph. A little girl, 2 years old, dark hair, a gap-toothed smile reaching toward the camera. Daniel went very still. Victoria came around the corner with another box, saw what he was holding, and stopped. That's Grace, she said quietly. It's the only picture I keep out. The only one I've been able to look at all these years. The rest are in a box I've never opened. She set down the box she was carrying, and crossed the room and took the photograph gently from his hands, and she looked at it, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked at it without flinching. For 15 years I kept her hidden. Her name, her face, all of it. I thought if I let anyone see her, they'd see how badly I'd failed her, and I couldn't survive that. She looked up at Daniel. And now her name's on a building that keeps 300 people employed. And her picture's going on the shelf in a house where a little girl sleeps on the couch. She's not hidden anymore, Daniel. You did that. You and Emma. You taught me the truth is worth more out in the light than safe in the dark, and I finally believed it enough to let my own daughter out of the box I'd buried her in. Daniel took the photo from her carefully and set it on the shelf at eye level, right in the center where anyone who came into the home would see it. There, he said, where she belongs. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth and just looked at it for a long moment. Her daughter's face finally out in the open after 15 years, and Daniel put his arm around her, and they stood there, and Emma slept on the couch. And it was quiet, and it was whole, and it was more of a home than either of them had believed they'd ever have again. And then Daniel, tired, happy, standing in the middle of a life he never thought he'd get to live, felt something rise in him. A memory. A joke. The same loose, easy, guard-down feeling he'd had one night in a boardroom a lifetime ago, when he'd said something without thinking and watched the most powerful woman in the world turn red to the tips of her ears. He looked at Victoria. He grinned. So, he said, any chance I can just stay here tonight? And Victoria Hale, who no longer had an empire, who had a small, honest company, and a daughter's name on the door, and a photograph finally out in the light, and a tired man she loved standing in her half-unpacked living room, laughed. And then, exactly the way she had a year ago, exactly the same, she blushed, right up to the tips of her ears. The untouchable woman undone by a single stupid joke twice in one lifetime. But this time, she didn't look away. This time, she reached into her pocket and she took out something small and metal, and she held it out to him in the palm of her open hand. A key. You don't have to ask anymore, Victoria said. You never did. It just took me a year to figure out how to say it. Daniel looked down at the key in her hand. And then he looked at the woman holding it out to him. The woman who'd walked out of a board meeting to save his daughter, who'd held him up when his legs gave out, who'd put her dead child's name on the front of everything she was rebuilding, who'd finally, after 15 years of armor, let herself be reached. He understood now. All of it. He understood the blush that first night. Not embarrassment, never embarrassment, but the terror of a woman feeling something crack open in armor she'd spent her whole life welding shut. He understood why she'd said months ago, when this is over, if you still want to know, I'll tell you. He understood everything he hadn't understood back when he was just a tired man, kicking himself over a joke he thought had meant nothing. It had never meant nothing. It had meant everything from the very first time he said it. He just hadn't known that the words, "Can I stay here tonight?" weren't really a question about a place to sleep. They were two lonely people asking each other the only question that ever really matters. Can I stop being alone? Will you let me stay? Am I safe here? And the answer finally was yes. Daniel took the key. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't a speech kind of man, and she'd never needed one from him. He just closed his hand around the key, and he pulled her in, and he held her. And across the room, a 9-year-old girl, who was only pretending to be asleep, opened one eye, saw the key change hands, saw her father and the woman who'd chosen them, wrapped up in each other in the middle of a half-unpacked home, and smiled to herself, and closed her eye again, and let the grown-ups have their moment. Because Emma already knew what her father was just now learning. That home was never the apartment with the chipped table, and it was never the glass office at the top of the world, and it wasn't even this new house with the yard and the boxes and the photograph finally out in the light. Home wasn't a building. It never had been. Home was the people who chose to protect each other before they ever had the words to say why. Home was a man who wouldn't leave the truth alone, and a woman who wouldn't stay silent, and a little girl who kept them both honest. Home was 3 people who had each been alone in their own separate ways, standing in one room finally done being alone. And here is the truth that a tired accountant and an unarmored woman and a whale-loving little girl paid everything to learn the truth worth carrying out of this story and into your own life tonight. The greatest love does not begin with perfect words. It does not begin with certainty or courage or the right thing said at the right time. It begins in the smallest, most ordinary moment when 2 lonely people, frightened and guarded, and sure, they've already lost their chance at happiness, quietly decide to protect each other before either of them is brave enough to admit how much they've already come to care. Daniel Cole made a joke one night because he was too tired to guard himself. Victoria Hale blushed because for 1/2 of 1 second she let herself want something. And a year later, a key changed hands in a half-unpacked living room, and neither of them was ever alone again. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for love to arrive with trumpets and certainty. It never does. It arrives quiet. It arrives tired. It arrives disguised as an ordinary evening and a stupid joke and a hand held across a chipped table. And the only people who ever get to keep it are the ones brave enough to reach out and take the key when it's finally at last held out to them. Daniel took the key. And that made all the difference.